Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back through the rain-soaked streets of 1670s England and pushing open the heavy door of a roadside tavern. Picture it. Your boots are caked with mud that's probably half horse manure. Your woolen cloak weighs about 15 pounds because it's absolutely drenched, and you're about to enter a room where the concepts of personal space and fire safety regulations haven't been invented yet. The reality check. You probably won't survive your first sip of whatever the tavern keeper calls wine without questioning every life choice that brought you here. But that's exactly why we're doing this. To experience one completely ordinary night in a world where ordinary meant dodging chamber pot contents from second-story windows and sharing your bed with 3 strangers and an undetermined number of fleas. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in Tokyo at 3 a.m., Manchester at bedtime, somewhere in California pretending you're going to sleep soon? I love seeing where this channel reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your hand finds the iron latch, cold, slightly greasy from hundreds of other palms, and you push. The door resists for a moment, swollen from the autumn rain, then swings inward with a groan that somehow cuts through the noise inside. Immediately, you're hit with a wall of sensations that's almost physical. Warmth first, blessed warmth after the miserable drizzle outside, but it comes wrapped in smoke thick enough to taste. Your eyes start watering before you've taken 2 steps inside. The smell is complex. There's the sharp tang of spilled ale mixing with wood smoke, unwashed bodies pressed too close together, meat cooking somewhere in the back, tallow candles burning with that distinctive animal fat smell, and underneath it all the earthy scent of rushes on the floor that probably should have been changed last week. Modern you wants to recoil. 17th century you? This is just what inside smells like. You'll stop noticing in about 5 minutes. The noise level is remarkable. Conversations overlap and compete. Someone's laughing too loudly in the corner. An argument about sheep prices escalates near the fire. A woman's voice calls for more ale. Wooden bowls clatter, a dog barks. Historians still argue whether taverns were genuinely this chaotic, or if contemporary accounts exaggerated for moral judgment purposes, but standing here now, you're voting for genuinely this chaotic. The acoustic situation isn't helped by the low ceiling. Those massive oak beams are maybe 7 feet up at their highest point, and you instinctively duck even though you've got clearance. Centuries of smoke have turned the wood black and shiny, like it's been lacquered. You step fully inside and let the door swing shut behind you, cutting off the sound of rain drumming on the street. For a moment, you just stand there, dripping onto rushes that squish wetly underfoot. Your eyes are adjusting to the dimness. The main light comes from a substantial fire in the hearth, and maybe a dozen tallow candles scattered around the room. It's not bright by any modern standard. It's more like permanent twilight with occasional bright spots. You can see faces, but reading would be a challenge. The room itself is larger than you expected, maybe 30 feet across, with the ceiling beams running lengthwise and smaller rooms visible through doorways in the back. Every bit of wall space seems to be occupied. Benches line the perimeter, with tables scattered throughout the centre. And people, so many people. At least 30 souls are crammed in here, and the fire's roaring to accommodate them all. The windows, small, with diamond-paned glass that's probably worth more than everything you own, are firmly shuttered against the rain. Privacy and fresh air are not the priorities here. You notice the floor has a slight slope to it, and not in an intentional, we planned good drainage way. More like, this building has been settling for 100 years and no one's particularly worried about it way. The whole structure has that lived-in wonkiness of pre-industrial construction. Nothing is quite level, nothing is quite straight. The plastered walls between the timber frames are stained with smoke and possibly mildew, decorated here and there with hooks holding leather ale jacks and the occasional piece of harness waiting for repair. Someone jostles past you, a serving girl with a tray of wooden cups, moving with practiced efficiency through the crowd. She doesn't apologize, because why would she? You're blocking the doorway like a tourist, which technically you are. You step aside, pressing against the wall, feeling the cool plaster through your wet cloak. A mainstream historical fact for you. English taverns in this period served as everything from postal stations to courthouses to employment agencies. This isn't just a bar, It's infrastructure. Your hat is dripping a steady stream of water down your collar. You take it off and immediately feel the warmth of the room on your wet hair. Now that you're not actively dripping, you can actually look at what's around you, or more accurately, what's holding you up. Because this building, it's old, not charmingly vintage old. More like your great-grandfather drank here and his great-grandfather probably did too old. The main structural timbers are massive oak beams, dark as chocolate and hard as iron, each one hewn from a single tree that was probably growing when Henry VIII was still on his first wife. You can see the adze marks in the wood where some long-dead carpenter shaped these beams by hand, one careful strike at a time. The building technique is called timber framing, and it's essentially a massive wooden skeleton filled in with whatever was cheap and available. In this case, the gaps between the timbers are packed with wattle and daub, woven sticks plastered over with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung. Yes, dung. The walls are partly made of poop. Before you get too judgmental, remember that this mixture dries hard, insulates reasonably well, and costs basically nothing. Modern, you might wrinkle your nose. Practical 17th century, you knows this is just sensible building. The floor is packed earth in some sections, worn flagstone in others, probably added piecemeal as the tavern keeper could afford it or trade for it. The rushes scattered across everything are meant to soak up spills and provide a tiny bit of cushioning, but they're also serving as a multi-purpose waste management system. Dropped food? Into the rushes. Spilled ale? Rushes. Things we won't mention in polite company. You're starting to understand why these get changed periodically. The smell rising from under your boots has layers, like a very unfortunate parfum. Looking up again, you notice the ceiling beams are definitely not level. The whole structure has a slight lean to it, like a drunk trying to look sober. This isn't collapse imminent. It's just what happens when a building made of wood sits on English soil for generations. The timber settles, the ground shifts, moisture does its thing, and gradually everything finds a new equilibrium that would horrify a modern structural engineer but seems to work fine in practice. Historians still argue whether timber frame buildings were deliberately designed with some flexibility to accommodate this settling, or whether people just accepted wonkiness as inevitable. Either way, this place has been leaning for decades and shows no sign of falling down tonight. The windows, those small diamond-paned affairs you noticed earlier, are actually a point of pride. Glass is expensive. The fact that this tavern has actual glass windows rather than just shuttered openings means the owner has been doing all right. Though the glass itself is imperfect, full of bubbles and waves that distort any view, each pane held in place by lead caming that's gone soft and slightly green with age. During the day, these would let in wan, watery light. Right now, with the shutters closed against the weather, they're just dark squares punctuating the walls. The hearth dominates one entire wall, a massive stone affair blackened with use, easily 6 feet wide and deep enough that a child could stand inside it. And speaking of the hearth, here's your quirky tidbit. Some taverns from this period supposedly hid priest holes or smuggling compartments in their chimney structures. Whether this one has any secrets lurking in its stonework, you'll probably never know. But it's a comforting thought that these old bones might have stories beyond just serving ale to tired travellers. The thatch roof, which you obviously can't see from inside but you know is up there, is probably 2 feet thick and home to an entire ecosystem of mice, birds, and insects. Thatch is wonderful insulation, relatively cheap to maintain, and only moderately terrifying from a fire safety perspective. Which is to say, very terrifying by modern standards. One stray spark from that roaring fire, and the whole place could go up like a torch. But fire insurance won't be invented for another few decades, and the chimney seems to be drawing reasonably well, so everyone's just living with the risk. You notice patches on the walls where repairs have been made. Newer plaster over old, timbers reinforced with additional bracing, one section where the daub is distinctly paler than the rest, suggesting recent work. This building is a living document of maintenance and modification. When something breaks, you fix it with whatever's at hand. Architectural purity is for people with more money than sense. The doors, and there are several leading to back rooms, the kitchen area, and presumably upstairs to sleeping chambers, are all solid oak, hung on iron hinges that probably weigh 10 pounds each. These aren't the hollow core doors of modern construction. These could stop a battering ram. Okay, maybe not a battering ram, but definitely an angry drunk. The main door you entered through has a substantial wooden bar that can be dropped into brackets at night, because security in the 1670s means physical barriers, not alarm systems. Near the ceiling, you spot the remnants of decorative painting on one of the support posts, faded red and yellow designs that might be floral or might just be abstract. Taverns occasionally got fancy with their interior decoration, though most of it has been smoked into obscurity. What you're seeing is probably the ghost of something that was quite cheerful when it was new, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. The whole structure creaks occasionally, little settling sounds as the warmth from the fire makes the timbers expand slightly. It's talking to you, this building, in the language of wood and stone and century-old joints. Nothing alarming, just the ambient noise of a place that's been standing since your great-great-great-grandfather was young and plans to keep standing long after you're gone. Your eyes have adjusted now, and you can properly take in the main room, this beating heart of the establishment where everything happens at once. It's organised chaos, if organised is being generous. The fire in that massive hearth is doing its absolute best to heat 30-plus people, and mostly succeeding, though the warmth distribution is deeply unfair. The people nearest the flames look like they're contemplating removing layers. You, still near the door, can see your breath when you exhale into a shadow. The tables scattered throughout the room are a mismatched collection that suggests decades of acquisition rather than any purchasing. Plan. Long trestle tables dominate the centre, heavy oak things that could probably survive a siege, with benches on either side packed with bodies sitting shoulder to shoulder. Smaller tables huddle against the walls, maybe 2 feet across, with stools or the occasional actual chair. Not the chairs you're thinking of, though. These are solid, heavy affairs with no upholstery whatsoever, the kind that make you grateful you've got some natural padding. Every single surface has that particular patina of use that only comes from years of spilled drinks, carved initials, hot bowls set down directly on wood, and the general accumulation of sticky residue that no amount of wiping can fully eliminate. The tabletops gleam dully in the firelight, and not in a good way. It's the gleam of ancient grease and ale and candle wax melted and rehardened so many times it's become part of the wood grain. You make a mental note not to touch anything unnecessarily, then immediately realise that's impossible. Everything requires touching. The firelight, and this is where things get almost pretty, dances across the room in ways that electric light never will. It's alive, this illumination, flickering and shifting with every slight draft, every movement of air. When someone walks past a candle, shadows leap up the walls. The fire sends orange and gold light rippling across faces, turning everyone into studies in chiaroscuro. Pewter tankards catch the light and throw it back in bright gleams. A copper pot hanging from a ceiling hook glows like a small sun. Speaking of pewter, there's a lot of it on display. Tankards, plates, a few serving vessels, all catching that firelight and announcing their worth. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Pewter was the middle-class option for tableware in this period, sitting between expensive silver and cheap wood. Having this much pewter on display is the tavern keeper's way of saying, we're respectable, we're successful, and we're definitely not using wooden bowls unless you're really, really poor. It's status display masquerading as practical dinnerware. The bodies packed into this space represent a slice of English society that would never normally congregate this closely. A merchant in a decent wool coat shares bench space with a labourer whose hands are stained with what's probably not mud. A woman in a white cap and clean apron, cleaner than most things in here anyway, sits with 2 companions, their heads bent in conversation. 3 men in the corner are playing cards, their faces professionally neutral. Someone's dog is under a table hoping for dropped food. Someone else's dog is eyeing that dog with territorial interest. The noise level operates in waves. Sometimes a lull happens, just for a moment, when conversations pause to breathe and you can hear the fire crackling and rain hitting the shutters outside. Then someone laughs, or calls for more ale, or slams a cup down, and the volume surges back up. It's like an ocean of sound with its own tides and rhythms. After a while, you stop trying to pick out individual conversations and just let it wash over you as ambient human noise. The smell, remember, is still complex, but you're adapting. Your nose is learning to prioritize. Food smells are pushing forward now. Something's cooking that involves onions and probably mutton, and your stomach reminds you that you've been travelling since dawn on nothing but bread and cheese. There's bread baking or warming somewhere too, that yeasty scent cutting through the smoke. Also hay, Someone's brought in livestock smells on their clothes, that barnyard earthiness that's just part of rural life. Every time the back door opens, servants going to the kitchen building, because of course the actual cooking fire is in a separate structure to reduce the whole burning down the tavern risk. A draft cuts through and makes the hearth fire gutter. The candles flicker. Everyone looks up, mildly annoyed at the cold intrusion, then returns to their business. Temperature control is a constant negotiation between too hot, too cold, and too smoky. The walls, where you can see them between people and furniture, have a few concessions to decoration. A painted board announces prices in careful lettering that's been refreshed multiple times. Some pewter plates hung on the wall, more status display. What might be a religious text in a wooden frame, though you'd need to get closer to read it. Historians still argue whether taverns genuinely maintained religious imagery for piety's sake, or just to ward off accusations of running disorderly houses, but either way, God's apparently watching you drink. Your quirky detail for this section. Some taverns supposedly kept peacock feathers or other exotic decorations to suggest worldliness and travelled sophistication. You don't spot any peacock feathers here, but there's definitely a set of antlers mounted above the hearth that are either from an impressively large deer or the tavern keeper is telling tales about his hunting prowess. The floor is getting more traffic than a modern highway. Servants weave between tables with practiced efficiency, their arms laden with jugs and bowls. Customers stand, sit, shift, jostle. The dogs relocate strategically, and through it all those rushes on the floor compress and release. Compress and release. Releasing little puffs of smell that you're trying very hard not to analyze. Someone's carved their initials into the table nearest you. TB was 1663, which means this surface has been collecting abuse for at least 14 years. That's almost comforting. This place has seen thousands of nights like this one, and it'll see thousands more. Movement near the fire catches your attention, a figure with the unmistakable bearing of someone who owns this chaos. The tavern keeper is a man in his late 40s, thick through the middle in that prosperous tradesman way that announces he's definitely not skipping meals. He's wearing a leather apron over a woolen waistcoat, sleeves rolled to the elbows despite the season, revealing forearms that have hoisted countless barrels. His face is weathered and red, either from proximity to the fire or sampling his own wares, probably both. And his eyes, those are the important part, are constantly moving, tracking every person, every transaction, every potential problem brewing in his establishment. He's currently settling a dispute about a bill with a traveller who's clearly trying to claim he ordered less than he consumed. The tavern keeper's expression doesn't change. He's seen this exact performance 1,000 times, but his voice carries just enough edge to cut through the noise. 3 pints of ale, 1 bowl of stew, bread, that's 4p halfpenny, and we both know it. The traveller deflates slightly and produces the coins. The tavern keeper's hand moves with practiced speed, checking each coin's weight and edge before they disappear into the leather purse at his belt. He's pleasant enough about it, but there's steel underneath. You don't run a roadside tavern for 20 years by being anybody's fool. His wife appears from the kitchen doorway, and the family resemblance in their operational style is immediate. She's a few years younger, wearing a practical wool dress with an apron that was probably clean this morning and absolutely isn't now. Her hair is tucked under a linen cap, and she moves through the crowd with the kind of efficiency that suggests she could navigate this room blindfolded. She's carrying a large jug of ale in one hand and a stack of wooden bowls in the other, and she sets them down at a table without spilling a drop or breaking stride. Her eyes are doing the same constant scan as her husband's. Who needs more ale? Who's getting too drunk? Who just walked in and needs to be assessed for troublemaking potential? Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most taverns in this period were indeed family operations, with wives and children working alongside the keeper. This wasn't a hobby or helping out. Women ran significant portions of tavern business, often managing the kitchen, the serving and the money with equal authority. The tavern keeper's wife isn't just the woman behind the man. She's a full business partner who probably handles the actual accounting because she's better at it. You watch them work in tandem, this married couple who've clearly developed a wordless communication system over decades. He glances toward a table where voices are getting raised. She's already moving that direction with a pitcher, ready to either diffuse with alcohol or intervene directly. A young man, their son, based on the jaw, line, is working the area near the fire, collecting empty cups and wiping down tables with a rag that's doing its best. He's maybe 16, learning the family trade through total immersion, and he's got the same watchful expression starting to develop. This is a dynasty in miniature. There's also a daughter, perhaps 14, helping serve food from the kitchen. She's learned to navigate the crowd while avoiding wandering hands. A quick sidestep here, a sharp elbow there, all while keeping her tray of bowls level. Her mother probably taught her these maneuvers before she taught her letters. The reality of tavern keeping for women means developing a very specific set of skills. Be friendly enough to encourage business, firm enough to maintain respect, and always aware of who in the room might be a problem. The tavern keeper's attention lands on you, still standing near the door like someone's lost nephew. His assessment takes maybe 3 seconds. You're wet, you're travel-worn, you've got a decent cloak, which means some money, and you're not drunk yet, which means you're a potential customer, not a current problem. He gives you a nod that's part welcome, part find a seat or get out of the doorway. You're being managed, efficiently and professionally. The cash flow through this operation is constant and carefully monitored. You watch coins change hands at least a dozen times in as many minutes, always checked, always tested against teeth or thumbnail to ensure they're genuine silver and not clipped. Coin clipping was a real problem. People would shave silver from the edges of coins and pass them at full value. The tavern keeper's experienced fingers can probably detect a clipped coin in the dark. Every transaction gets a mental tally. He's not writing anything down, but he knows exactly what every table owes and who's trying to leave without paying. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some tavern keepers supposedly marked cards or doctored dice to ensure the house took a cut of gambling proceeds, or at minimum they charged a table fee for the privilege of gaming in their establishment. Whether this particular keeper engages in such practices you can't tell, but the card game in the corner is definitely happening with his knowledge and tacit approval, which probably means he's getting something out of it. His wife is back from her delivery run, and you overhear her muttering to her husband about the mutton. Something about it needs to go tonight or it won't keep. Historians still argue whether tavern food was genuinely as dodgy as satirical writing suggested, or if that was class prejudice from people who could afford better. But based on this snippet, you're guessing freshness is a flexible concept here. If the mutton needs to go tonight, it's going into every stew bowl whether it's quite right or not. The son is now dealing with a spill. Someone knocked over a tankard, and he's sprinkling fresh rushes over the puddle like that solves anything. Which in fairness it kind of does. This is the 17th century version of throw a towel on it. The daughter is dodging another wandering hand, this time with a look that could freeze ale, and the offender wisely reconsiders his life choices. She learned that look from her mother. Now that you've identified the power structure of this establishment, you can turn your attention to your fellow patrons, and what a collection they are. This is humanity in cross-section, or at least the slice of humanity that needs shelter, ale, and questionable food on a rainy autumn evening. You're looking at people you'd never normally see in the same room. Class, occupation, and respectability all jumbled together because everyone needs somewhere warm and dry. The merchant is easy to spot. He's the one at the corner table with the good coat and the worried expression. Wool broadcloth, probably from London, with pewter buttons that catch the firelight. His boots are decent leather, recently polished, and he's got a leather satchel clutched close to his side like it contains the crown jewels. It probably contains accounts, samples, or money, possibly all three, and he's radiating anxiety about it. He's nursing his ale slowly, making it last, his eyes flicking toward the door every time it opens. Waiting for someone? Worried about robbers? Just generally anxious because merchants are professionally paranoid? All of the above. He's travelling alone, which is either brave or foolish, and he's clearly wondering if it was the right choice. 3 labourers occupy a trestle table near the fire, and they've got that end-of-day exhaustion that only comes from actual physical work. Their clothes are rough wool, stained with honest dirt, and probably several weeks past washing. Their hands, you can see them wrapped around wooden cups, are calloused, scarred, and ingrained with dirt that no amount of scrubbing will fully remove. They're loud, these 3. Their conversation punctuated with laughter that's too explosive for the joke that prompted it. That's the sound of men who've done hard labour and are now blessed with ale and warmth. One of them has a limp you noticed when he got up for a refill. Another's missing 2 fingers on his left hand. These are bodies shaped by their work, and they're making the most of their leisure. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The labouring classes made up about 75% of England's population in this period, but they controlled maybe 5% of the wealth. These men scraping together pennies for ale are the majority numerically speaking, even if the merchant in the corner represents more economic power than all three combined. Then there's the gentleman, and you use that term loosely. He's sitting alone at a small table, and everything about him is slightly off. The clothes are right. Good fabric, fashionable cut, lace at the collar and cuffs. The posture is right. That casual sprawl of someone, accustomed to space and deference, but the details betray him. The coat cuffs are frayed, the lace isn't quite clean. Those boots, they've been repaired multiple times, and not by a master cobbler. He's drinking wine, not ale, making a statement, but you notice he makes each cup last a suspicious amount of time. He's performing gentility on a budget, and you're watching a masterclass in maintaining appearances. Is he a genuine gentleman fallen on hard times? A confidence man? Someone's illegitimate son with ideas above his station? You'll probably never know, but he's definitely lying about something. The locals are easy to identify because they're the ones who aren't impressed by anything. That cluster near the hearth? They've been coming here for years, maybe decades. They've got their usual spots, their usual cups, and they're settling in for their usual evening. One old man is practically part of the furniture. He's definitely been sitting in that chair since before you were born. They're drinking steadily but not rapidly, making their pennies stretch because this is routine entertainment, not a special occasion. Their conversation is about local matters, whose roof is leaking, what the harvest looks like, whether the squire's new horse is really worth what he paid for it. The kind of talk that excludes outsiders naturally, not rudely. You just don't have the context to follow along. There's a woman travelling alone, which is unusual enough to be noteworthy. She's maybe 30, dressed respectably but not richly, and she's positioned herself at a small table, with her back to the wall and clear sight lines to both doors. Smart. Her wedding ring is visible. She's making sure everyone knows she's married, but no husband is evident. Widow? Wife travelling on business? You're not sure, but she's handling herself with the competent wariness of someone who's done this before. She's eating methodically, not engaging with anyone, and her eyes miss nothing. You make a mental note not to underestimate her. Historians still argue whether lone female travellers were genuinely as rare as moralistic literature suggested, or whether they were simply underdocumented because they didn't fit narrative expectations. But watching this woman, you're inclined to think they were more common than the records show. She's clearly not some scandalous outlier. She's just a person with somewhere to be and the competence to get there. Two apprentices, boys really, maybe 15 years old, are sharing a bench and whispering with a kind of badly suppressed excitement that suggests they've snuck out and are terrified of being caught. They're dressed in their master's livery, which means someone is going to notice they're missing eventually. They're splitting one cup of ale between them and making it last, because they probably pooled their meagre coins to afford even that. Youth and inexperience radiate off them like heat. They think they're being worldly and sophisticated. They're adorable. Here's your quirky tidbit. Apprentices running off to taverns was such a common problem that some guild regulations specifically forbade it, with punishments ranging from fines to extensions of the apprenticeship term. These two are risking real consequences for one evening of feeling grown up. A carter sits alone, still wearing his heavy coat despite the room's warmth. He smells of horse and leather and long days on the road. His face is weathered to the colour and texture of old saddle, and he's working through his ale with the focused determination of someone who earned it. He's not here for conversation. He's here for warmth, food, and enough alcohol to let him sleep despite his aching back. Every now and then he rolls his shoulders, working out stiffness, and you hear joints crack even from across the room. The card players you noticed earlier deserve closer attention. 3 men, all well dressed enough to suggest they can afford to lose money, all carefully neutral in expression. The cards are dog-eared and probably marked. The stakes are small coins and scribbled IOUs, and absolutely nobody believes this is a friendly game. One player has the smooth hands of someone who doesn't do manual labour. Another has a scar running from eyebrow to jaw. The third keeps adjusting his hat in a way that might be nervous habit or might be a signal to someone. You decide watching is safer than participating. You've been standing near the door long enough that your cloak has stopped dripping and started steaming slightly in the warmth. Time to commit to this experience, which means you need to order something to drink. This should be simple. It is not simple. The serving staff are moving at approximately the speed of sound, and they're using that selective blindness that service workers throughout history have perfected. the ability to look directly at you without actually seeing you until they're good and ready. The tavern keeper's daughter sweeps past with a tray of empty bowls, and you try to catch her eye. She's already gone. The son passes within arm's reach, and you open your mouth to speak, but he's pivoted away to deal with someone who's actually waving money. The wife is somewhere in the kitchen. You're beginning to understand that getting served requires strategy, timing, and a willingness to be mildly aggressive in ways that would seem rude in any other context. You work your way toward the fire, partly for warmth, partly because that seems to be where transactions happen. The crowd is thick here, bodies pressed close, and you're immediately aware that personal space is a modern luxury. Someone's elbow is basically in your ribs. Someone else's wet dog is investigating your boots with concerning interest. The heat from the fire is almost too much after the cold rain, and you can feel sweat starting to form under your heavy cloak. You should probably take it off, but where would you put it? Every peg and hook on. The walls is already claimed by someone else's wet wool. The tavern keeper himself is suddenly right there, appearing like he materialized from smoke. What'll it be? His tone is professionally neutral, friendly enough to encourage spending, brusque enough to keep things moving. He's probably asked this question 10,000 times, and he'll ask it 10,000 more tonight. I'll, you say, because that's the safe choice. Wine is more expensive and possibly more dangerous. Spirits exist, but they're harsh enough to strip paint. Ale is the universal answer. Pint or half? He's already reaching for a leather jack, a drinking vessel made of hardened leather, coated on the inside with pitch to make it waterproof. These things are practically indestructible, and definitely haven't been properly cleaned since the reign of Charles I. Pint. You're committing now. Penny halfpenny. He's not asking, he's informing. You fish in your purse for the coins, and he takes them with that same practiced assessment, checking weight, checking edges, checking you're not trying to pass off anything suspicious. The coins disappear, and he's already turned to plunge the leather jack into a barrel behind the makeshift bar area. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ale in this period was a staple beverage, safer than water, because the brewing process killed most harmful bacteria. People drank it for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and everything in between. Children drank small beer, weaker ale, instead of water. This wasn't recreational drinking. This was hydration that happened to have alcohol in it. The jack comes back full, foam slopping over the edge, and he thrusts it at you with a kind of casual disregard for spillage that makes you understand why the floor is what it is. You take it, and immediately your modern sensibilities stage a small revolt. The rim of the jack is not clean. There's a visible film of something on it. Previous drinkers have left their mark, literally. The outside is sticky. The pitch lining on the inside gives it a faintly tarry smell that mingles with the ale in ways that are not appetizing. But everyone else is drinking from similar vessels without apparent concern, so you're going to have to make peace with 17th century hygiene standards, which is to say, there aren't any, not in the way you understand them. Things get rinsed, maybe, when someone remembers. Mostly they just get reused until they fall apart. The concept that invisible germs might be a problem won't gain widespread acceptance for another 200 years. You find a spot to lean against a wall, not sit because every seat is taken, and you examine your ale. It's cloudy, brownish, with bits of something floating in it. Sediment, probably, maybe hop residue, hopefully nothing else. The smell is yeasty and slightly sour, not unpleasant exactly, but definitely alive. This beer has personality. The first sip is an experience. It's flat by modern standards. There's no carbonation to speak of. The flavour is strong malty, with a bitterness that makes you understand why hops were added to this stuff in the first place. It's not cold. Why would it be cold? Refrigeration is a fantasy. It's roughly room temperature, which means roughly the temperature of a packed tavern on a warm evening, which means slightly too warm for comfort. But it's wet, and it's alcoholic, and after a day of travelling through autumn rain, it's exactly what your body wants, even if your mind has reservations. You watch others drinking and notice the techniques vary. The labourers take great gulping swallows, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands. The merchant sips carefully, like he's rationing. The suspicious gentleman drinks with his pinky extended, because of course he does. The old locals drain their cups with the mechanical efficiency of long practice, then wait patiently for refills. The serving girl passes again, the daughter, and this time you're ready. You make eye contact and hold up your half-empty jack with a questioning expression. She nods, makes a mental note, and continues her rounds. You'll get that refill eventually. Probably. The service model here is definitely, we'll get to you when we get to you, and complaining won't make it faster. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some taverns supposedly kept separate good vessels for wealthy customers and inferior ones for everyone else, though they claim all vessels were equal. Whether that's true or just class-conscious paranoia, you can't verify, but you're definitely not drinking from the good stuff. Historians still argue whether tavern ale was genuinely as variable in quality as contemporary complaints suggested, or whether people just liked complaining about their beer as much then as now. But based on what you're tasting, you're voting for genuinely variable. This particular batch is drinkable, but you can imagine circumstances, a hot summer, a lazy brewer, a barrel that sat too long, where it would be significantly less pleasant. Now that you've committed to the ale, you're curious about what else is on offer in this establishment. The barrel behind the bar area, and bar is generous. It's really just a cleared section of wall with barrels stacked on supports, has company. You count at least 4 barrels of varying sizes, plus some earthenware jugs, and a few suspicious-looking bottles on a shelf. Each represents a different adventure in 17th century beverages, ranging from probably fine to you'll regret this tomorrow to you might actually regret this tonight. The ale you're drinking is small beer, the everyday stuff, maybe 3 to 4% alcohol, brewed in batches large enough to supply the regular customers. It's the working person's beverage, the thing you drink when you're thirsty and want to stay functional. But there's also strong ale, which is exactly what it sounds like. Double the strength, double the price, and double the likelihood you'll wake up with regrets. You can identify the people drinking strong ale by their progressively louder voices and deteriorating decision-making. That labourer who was laughing too hard earlier? Strong ale. The gentleman who probably isn't is performing sobriety while drinking strong ale, which is a feat of determination you have to admire. Then there's the wine situation. Wine is aspirational drinking. It costs more, it comes from somewhere exotic, or at least claims to, and drinking it announces you have disposable income and continental sophistication. The merchant has wine. The suspicious gentleman has wine. A couple at a corner table are sharing wine and trying to look romantic despite the screaming child 3 tables over. But here's the thing about wine in an English roadside tavern in 1670-something. It's a gamble. The good wine, French, possibly Spanish, imported through official channels and stored with some care, exists. You've probably heard of it. You're definitely not getting it here. What you're getting is wine that started its journey months ago, possibly in a ship's hold where it cooked in the sun and froze in storms and generally had adventures that wine shouldn't have. Then it sat in a warehouse. Then someone bought it cheap. Then it got divided into smaller barrels and sold to tavern keepers who are serving it at prices that suggest it's much nicer than it actually is. The colour is your first clue. Good red wine should be, well, red. The wine being served here is more of a brownish crimson, like someone mixed red wine with old gravy. The white wine, which you can see in one of those earthenware jugs, has an amber tinge that suggests either extreme age or extreme oxidation, possibly both. Neither is encouraging. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wine adulteration was a serious problem in this period. Unscrupulous sellers would cut wine with water, add alum to clarify cloudy wine, use lead-based sweeteners to mask sourness, or just sell you something that had never seen a grape, and call it wine. The regulations existed, but enforcement was spotty, especially once you got outside London. This tavern keeper probably isn't actively poisoning anyone. Repeat customers are good for business. But quality control is more of a suggestion than a standard. You watch someone order wine and immediately understand the hierarchy. The tavern keeper pulls out a slightly nicer vessel, actual pewter instead of leather, fills it from one of the jugs, and presents it with a flourish that doesn't quite hide the fact that this wine has seen better days. The customer takes a sip, grimaces almost imperceptibly, and continues drinking because they've already paid for it. And wine is what sophisticated people drink, even when it tastes like vinegar's angry cousin. The spirits lurking on that shelf represent a different category of experience entirely. These are the drinks that exist for one purpose: rapid intoxication. Brandy, theoretically, though whether it's actually distilled from wine or from whatever was fermenting in someone's barn is anyone's guess. Something that might be gin, though the juniper flavour is competing with what tastes like industrial solvent. And aqua vitae, literally water of life, which is optimistic naming for something that probably shortens your life expectancy every time you drink it. The locals know better than to touch the spirits unless they're trying to forget something specific or prove something stupid. The spirits are for travellers who don't know the local wisdom, for people celebrating something worth celebrating, or for those moments when regular drunk isn't quite enough, and you need to graduate to forget your own name drunk. You watch someone order a measure of brandy, toss it back in one go, and then spend the next 30 seconds coughing like they've inhaled fire. Because they have, essentially. That's what spirits do to you when they're this rough. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some establishments supposedly kept separate barrels of good and common ale, serving the good stuff to those who could tell the difference and the swill to everyone else. Whether this tavern operates that system, you can't say, but you notice the tavern keeper served that merchant from a different barrel than he served you from. Make of that what you will. The barrel rotation is actually fascinating if you pay attention. The tavern keeper knows exactly which barrel is which without marking them. Muscle memory from years of practice. The ale barrels get tapped, served down, and replaced in a rhythm that suggests careful inventory management. Running out of ale would be catastrophic. Running out of the cheap ale would be even worse, because that's what keeps the regular customers regular. Historians still argue whether tavern keepers genuinely served the quality they advertised, or if caveat emptor was the universal rule. But watching the transactions, you're guessing it's a mix. The tavern keeper wants repeat business, so he can't serve complete garbage. But he also wants profit margins, so he's not serving premium products at common prices. It's a balance, and you're drinking the result of that balance right now. The temperature of your ale has not improved. If anything, it's gotten slightly warmer from your hand wrapped around the leather jack. You take another drink anyway, and you're starting to develop a taste for it. Or maybe your taste buds are just surrendering to the inevitable. Either way, it's going down easier now, and the alcohol is starting to spread a pleasant warmth through your chest. Someone nearby orders cider, and you watch that transaction with interest. Cider is the rural alternative to ale. Cheaper to produce if you've got apple trees, easier to store and variable in quality in exciting new ways. The cider comes from yet another barrel, and it pours out cloudy and brownish gold. The customer takes a long drink and smacks their lips in satisfaction, which either means it's good or they've killed enough brain cells to not care anymore. The general noise level suddenly shifts, still loud, but with a new quality to it. Anticipation. Because somewhere in the back, the kitchen has decided that food is ready, and the news travels through the room like wildfire. You don't hear an announcement so much as feel the collective awareness that supper is happening. Heads turn toward the kitchen doorway. Conversations pause mid-sentence. Even the card players glance up, though they're trying to pretend they're too sophisticated to care about something as pedestrian as dinner. The tavern keeper's wife emerges from the kitchen carrying a massive iron pot, and when you say massive, you mean could double as a bathtub for a small child. Massive. Steam rises from it in clouds that add to the room's already impressive atmosphere of moisture and smoke. She sets it down on a cleared section of table near the fire with a thunk that rattles nearby cups, and immediately people are moving toward it like pilgrims to a shrine. Her daughter is right behind with an armload of wooden bowls, mismatched, battered, and probably older than she is. They clatter onto the table in a pile, and the message is clear. If you want to eat, you're going to have to participate in the process. This isn't table service in the modern sense. This is food is available, serve yourself, or go hungry hospitality. The sun appears with a basket of bread, dark, dense rounds that look like they could be used as weapons in an emergency. Probably have been used as weapons, honestly. Bread theft was no joke. The serving process is beautifully chaotic. People grab bowls from the pile, jostle toward the pot, and the tavern keeper's wife ladles out portions with practiced efficiency. The ladle is enormous. You could probably water a small garden with it, and each scoop brings up chunks of something floating in brownish liquid. The steam smells of onions, turnips, mutton, and the particular earthiness that comes from root vegetables that have seen better days. It's not appetizing in the Instagram sense. It's appetizing in the you're hungry and this is hot and there's fat in it sense, which is really the only sense that matters here. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Pottage, essentially a thick stew of whatever was available, was the foundation of the English diet for most people in this period. Meat, if you were lucky, vegetables and grain if you weren't, all boiled together until it reached a consistency somewhere between soup and paste. This is peasant food, commoner food, the stuff that kept a nation fed on a budget that would make modern nutritionists weep. You watch the hierarchy play out in who gets served first. The merchant steps forward, and his portion is generous. Extra meat visible in the scoop, a nod of respect from the tavern keeper's wife. The gentleman, who probably isn't, gets a standard portion, but he's watching carefully to ensure he gets pieces of meat and not just liquid. The labourers wait their turn without complaint, knowing their portions will be adequate if not generous. The locals are completely relaxed about the whole process because they know the pot won't run out. It never does. That's the tavern keeper's reputation on the line. You join the queue, because it is a queue, English people invented queuing, and edge closer to the pot. The closer you get, the more you can see what you're actually about to eat. The stew is thick, glutinous even, with a layer of fat shimmering on top that catches the firelight in rainbow patterns. Chunks of meat, definitely mutton, probably from that sheep the tavern keeper's wife mentioned needed to go tonight, float alongside pieces of turnip, onion, and what might be parsnip or might be some other root vegetable that's been boiled into submission. There are oats or barley in there too, thickening the whole thing into something that could probably stand a spoon upright. Your turn arrives. The tavern keeper's wife looks at you with that assessing glance that determines your portion size. You're not a regular, but you paid for your ale without argument, and you're dressed well enough to suggest you'll order more. Standard portion it is. The ladle descends, comes up full, and dumps its contents into your bowl with a wet plop. Gravity is the only presentation style here. Bread? She's already reaching for the basket before you answer, because of course you want bread. Everyone wants bread. A round lands in your bowl, half submerging in the stew. The bread is meant to be both food and eating implement. You tear off chunks and use them to scoop up the stew, and when the bread is soaked with gravy and fat, you eat that too. It's efficient, it's practical, and it means fewer utensils to clean. Which is good, because you're starting to suspect clean means something very different here than in your normal life. The sun is collecting money as people serve themselves. 3p for the stew and bread, which is actually reasonable value when you consider you're getting calories, warmth, and something that's at least mostly edible. The prices are fixed and non-negotiable, though you notice the tavern keeper's wife has some flexibility in portion sizes that probably smooths over potential arguments. You retreat from the serving area with your bowl, looking for somewhere to actually eat this. The tables are all full, but there's space at the end of a bench if you don't mind being squeezed between a carter who smells of horse and a woman who's eating with the focused intensity of someone who hasn't had a proper meal in days. You squeeze in, and immediately the heat of the bodies around you is almost overwhelming. This is communal dining in its most literal sense. You're sharing breathing space with strangers while eating from a communal pot. The bowl is hot enough to be uncomfortable, and you have to shift your grip to avoid burning your fingers. The stew's heat is radiating up into your face as you lean over it, and you're suddenly aware that eating this is going to be a full-body experience. There's no graceful way to consume hot, thick stew from a wooden bowl while wedged between strangers in flickering firelight. Historians still argue whether communal eating in taverns created genuine social bonds or was simply economic necessity masquerading as fellowship, but sitting here now, you're inclined to think it's both. You're sharing food and space with people you'll never see again, and there's something fundamentally human about that. Also something fundamentally gross, but you're trying to focus on the profound aspects, the quirky tidbit you need. Some taverns supposedly rang a bell, or made some announcement when food was ready, but most just relied on the smell and the grapevine effect you just experienced. News travels fast when people are hungry. Around you, eating has commenced in earnest. The sounds are magnificently unrefined. Slurping, chewing, the wet noises of bread soaking up gravy, satisfied grunts, the occasional belch that no one acknowledges because acknowledging it would be weird. Table manners exist, but they're applied selectively and interpreted broadly. Time to actually eat this thing. You tear off a chunk of bread. It resists, because this bread has structural integrity that modern sandwich bread can only dream of, and use it to scoop up some of the stew. The bread immediately begins absorbing liquid like a sponge, getting heavier and softer in your fingers. You get it to your mouth before it disintegrates completely, and the first bite is a revelation in not what you expected, but somehow exactly what you expected. The flavour is aggressively savoury. Salt, lots of it, because salt is both preservative and primary seasoning in this era. Fat, that mutton grease coating your tongue in a way that's simultaneously unpleasant and deeply satisfying to your calorie-starved body. The meat itself is chewy, requiring actual work from your jaw muscles. Stringy in texture because this animal was not young, and was definitely not tender. The turnips have been boiled into near oblivion but still retain some earthiness. The onions are sweet and soft. The oats or barley provide a gluey thickness that makes the whole thing stick to the roof of your mouth. It's not good. Let's be clear about that. By modern standards, this is barely passable cafeteria food, but you're hungry, it's hot, and your body is very enthusiastically informing you that calories are calories, and this has calories. So you keep eating, tearing off more bread, scooping up more stew, developing a rhythm that everyone around you is also following. Scoop, bite, chew, swallow, repeat. Medieval humanity runs on patterns. Here's where the knife comes in. Because yes, you need to cut some of this meat into manageable pieces, and no, there are no utensils provided. You pull out your own knife. Everyone carries a personal knife. It's as standard as wearing shoes, and you use it to saw through a particularly stubborn chunk of mutton. The knife is multi-purpose. Eating, crafting, defense, general cutting tasks. It lives on your belt, and it's probably the single most important tool you own. The blade is maybe 4 inches long, simple steel, worn from use and sharpening, and it's done everything from cutting your food to cutting your fingernails. Forks exist, technically. You've heard of them. Rich people on the continent use them. Italians, mostly. The French are getting interested. In England, forks are viewed with suspicion as affected, unnecessary, and vaguely unmanly. God gave you fingers and a knife. That should be sufficient. The idea that you need a specialized implement to convey food from plate to mouth strikes most English people as the height of continental nonsense. So you're eating with bread, fingers, knife, and determination, just like everyone else in this room. The bread as utensil system works better than you'd think. The dense, coarse texture gives you something to grip, and the crust provides structural support for scooping. By the time you've finished your bowl, you've consumed probably half a loaf of bread, all of it thoroughly soaked in mutton fat and stew liquid. Your fingers are greasy, there's stew on your chin, and you're becoming very aware that napkins haven't been invented yet. Well, they've been invented. They exist in wealthy households, but they haven't made it to roadside taverns. You wipe your hands on your breeches like everyone else, because that's what breeches are for, apparently. The woman next to you eating with such intensity has finished her bowl and is now using the last piece of bread to wipe it clean, getting every last bit of fatty residue. She eats that final piece with evident satisfaction, sets the bowl aside, and only then allows herself to lean back and breathe. You just witnessed someone who knows what real hunger feels like. The carter on your other side is eating more slowly, methodically, like he's pacing himself for a long journey ahead. His knife, larger than yours, more worn, moves with practiced efficiency, cutting meat into precise small pieces before each bite. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Dining etiquette in this period was actually quite developed among the upper classes, with extensive rules about hand-washing, shared dishes, and proper behaviour. But tavern dining represented a different category entirely. Speed, efficiency, and getting fed were the priorities, and gentility could wait for dinner parties where it mattered. The mystery meat situation deserves attention. That mutton you're chewing could be from any part of the sheep, possibly from multiple sheep, and has definitely been cooked in a pot that's also accommodated chicken, beef, rabbit, and probably some things best not contemplated. The pot itself hasn't been properly emptied and cleaned in days, possibly weeks. The cooking process involves adding new ingredients to what's left from the previous batch, creating a continuous stew that technically never ends, just evolves. It's perpetual pottage, and it's a tradition that makes microbiologists weep, but somehow kept generations of people fed without mass die-offs. You fish out what might be a piece of barley, or might be a small pebble. Better not to investigate too closely. You set it aside and continue eating. The meat quality is variable. Some pieces are almost tender, others could be used to sole shoes. You're becoming convinced that multiple animals contributed to this batch, and their freshness at time of cooking was probably negotiable. Historians still argue whether tavern food was genuinely as bad as satirical literature portrayed it, or whether that was elitist snobbery from people who could afford better, but based on empirical evidence currently in your mouth, you're going to say the satirist had a point. This isn't poisonous, and it's not even the worst thing you could eat, but it's definitely operating on a fuel-not-flavour philosophy. Around you, the eating continues with various levels of enthusiasm and success. The apprentices are eating like they're worried someone will take it away, fast, messy, barely chewing. The merchant is attempting to eat delicately, which is admirable but futile when you're wielding bread against mutton stew. The locals are eating at a comfortable pace that suggests this is neither their first nor last bowl of this particular pot's output. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval and early modern sources suggest that tavern keepers occasionally supplemented their stews with found meat of dubious origin, roadkill, poached game, or animals that died of natural causes. Whether that's actually true or just urban legend designed to disgust the gullible, you're trying very hard not to think about it while you're still eating. Your bowl is nearly empty now, just the last dregs of gravy and some floating pieces of vegetable that weren't worth the effort. You follow the local woman's example and use your final piece of bread to swab the bowl clean, then eat that gloriously greasy bread with the satisfaction that surprises you. Your stomach, which has been demanding food for hours, is finally quiet. The warmth of the stew is spreading through your core. You're full in that heavy, slightly uncomfortable way that comes from eating dense, fatty food after a long day. You're still wiping grease from your fingers onto your breeches, a process that's becoming less effective with each wipe, when someone near the fire stands up with purpose. He's one of the locals, a wiry man in his 30s with calloused hands and the kind of face that's spent significant time outdoors. More importantly, he's carrying a fiddle, pulling it from a cloth bag with the care usually reserved for newborn babies or very expensive livestock. The conversation around him doesn't stop exactly, but it shifts, develops an undercurrent of anticipation. Something is about to happen. He tucks the fiddle under his chin with familiar ease, and even before he draws the bow across the strings, you can tell this isn't his first time, probably not his 1000th time either. The first notes cut through the tavern noise, bright, reedy, slightly out of tune in that way that somehow makes folk music more authentic. It's a jig, fast-paced and insistent, the kind of tune that gets into your bones whether you want it there or not. Within seconds, feet are tapping. Within a minute, someone's clapping along. Then, as if the fiddle was a signal, a second musician emerges from the general crowd. This one's got a pipe, a simple wooden recorder-like instrument, homemade from the look of it, probably carved during long winter evenings when there was nothing else to do. He joins in, finding the melody and weaving around it, adding a higher counterpoint that shouldn't work but absolutely does. The two musicians aren't looking at each other, aren't coordinating in any visible way, but they're locked together like they've been playing these tunes since before you were born. They probably have been. The atmosphere transforms, where before the tavern was simply loud, voices competing, transactions happening, the general chaos of people existing in proximity. Now it has direction. The music gives everything a pulse, a rhythm, a reason to be louder and more energetic. The tavern keeper doesn't stop serving, but his movements sync to the beat. Conversations continue, but they're punctuated by the melody. Even the fire seems to burn in time. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Music was absolutely central to tavern culture in this period, with establishments that could boast regular musicians often doing better business than those that couldn't. People came for the ale and stayed for the entertainment, and tavern keepers knew that a good fiddler was worth their weight in free drinks. Which, given how much musicians could drink, was a significant investment. A third musician appears, or rather reveals himself because he's been sitting in the corner the whole time, apparently waiting for his moment. He's got a drum, a simple tabor that he holds in one hand and strikes with a stick held in the other. The rhythm he adds is fundamental, driving, the heartbeat underneath the melody. Now you've got a proper ensemble, and the music swells to fill every corner of the room. You can feel it in your chest, in your still full stomach, in the bench beneath you that's vibrating slightly from the rhythmic stamping that started. The fiddler launches into a new tune without pausing, and this one's even faster, even more insistent. It's a dance tune, obviously, the kind where not dancing feels like a missed opportunity or possibly a personal failing. The locals know this one. You can tell by the way they're grinning at each other, the way they're already shifting to make space. Two of the labourers from earlier stand up, slightly unsteady from ale and food, and begin what could generously be called dancing, and accurately be called enthusiastic stomping with occasional coordination. Their technique is questionable, but their enthusiasm is absolute. They're holding each other's forearms and spinning, boots thundering on the floor in approximate time with the drum, laughing too loudly, occasionally colliding with furniture or other patrons and not particularly caring. Nobody minds. Or if they mind, they're not saying anything, because this is what happens in taverns when the music starts. Complaining about dancing is like complaining about breathing. What's the point? More people join in. The serving girl, the tavern keeper's daughter, is grabbed by one of the apprentices who suddenly found courage from somewhere, probably the bottom of his ale cup. She allows it, smiling, and they join the makeshift dance floor, which is really just the space near the fire where people have shuffled their benches back slightly. Her technique is much better than his, and she's clearly leading while making it look like he is. A kindness that will probably go unnoticed by the boy, but is appreciated by everyone watching. The merchant is not dancing, because merchants have dignity to maintain, and dancing in the roadside taverns is beneath them. But his foot is tapping. He's not immune to a good jig, even if he's pretending to be. The gentleman, who probably isn't, is also not dancing, but his fingers are drumming on his wine cup in time, and you catch him humming the melody under his breath. Even the card players have paused their game to watch, cards forgotten for the moment. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some local authorities tried to regulate or restrict music in taverns, worried it encouraged dancing, which encouraged disorder, which encouraged sin in various forms. These attempts were about as successful as you'd imagine, which is to say, not at all. People have always wanted to dance while drunk, and no amount of Puritan disapproval was going to stop them. The woman who ate with such intensity earlier has stood up and is dancing alone, not in a sad way, in a joyful, unself-conscious way that suggests she's got more important things to worry about than who's watching. She's spinning with her arms out, nearly hitting several people, her cap coming loose, and she's laughing. Actual, genuine laughter. The kind that comes from deep in your chest and doesn't care about anything else. The fiddler transitions again, this time to something slower, more lyrical, and the frantic dancing calms slightly into swaying, into couples holding each other and moving in small circles. The atmosphere hasn't calmed exactly, it's still energetic, still charged, but it's shifted into a different gear. The drummer continues his steady beat. The piper weaves a melody that's almost melancholy despite the major key, and the fiddle soars over it all. Historians still argue whether tavern music was genuinely skilled, or if most of it was amateur hour with instruments. But listening to these three musicians, you're impressed. They're not professionally trained, you'd bet money on that, but they're competent, they're confident, and they know their audience. They're playing music that makes people want to drink more ale, dance more energetically, and stay longer. They're doing their job perfectly. The fiddler finishes his current tune with a flourish that's slightly showing off, and in the brief pause that follows, someone's voice cuts through. "Give us the butcher boy." This is greeted with immediate enthusiasm from about half the room, and groans from the other half, which tells you everything you need to know about what kind of song the butcher boy is going to be. The fiddler grins, he was clearly waiting for this, and launches into the opening bars. The song starts innocently enough. There's a girl, there's a butcher's apprentice, there's courtship happening. Sweet, pastoral, the kind of thing you could sing in church if you weren't paying attention to the lyrics. Then the second verse happens, and you understand why half the room groaned. The courtship has progressed to activities that are definitely not church appropriate, described in metaphors that aren't fooling anybody. The girl's honour is negotiable, the butcher boy's intentions are clear, and the rhyme scheme is prioritising scandal over subtlety. But here's the thing. Everyone knows this song. The locals are singing along, every word, including the verses that make you wonder if this should be illegal. The labourers are belting it out with particular enthusiasm, probably because it's about their social class behaving badly and getting away with it. Even the merchant is mouthing some of the words, pretending he doesn't know them but clearly knowing them very well. The tavern keeper's wife rolls her eyes, but doesn't stop anyone, because this is just what happens when the ale flows and the music starts. The chorus is participatory, designed for drunk people to join in without needing to know the verses. With a hey and a ho and a hey nonny no, or something like that, the actual words are debatable and apparently optional. What matters is the volume and enthusiasm, both of which are considerable. The serving girl is blushing and trying not to laugh. Her mother has definitely heard worse. Her father is joining in. Here's your mainstream. Historical fact. Ballads and folk songs were the primary entertainment media of this period, spreading news, gossip, and scandalous stories through oral tradition. The bawdy ones were particularly resilient, passing from tavern to tavern, region to region, evolving slightly with each telling but keeping their essential character. Some of these songs have been making people uncomfortable for centuries, which is honestly impressive longevity for a dirty joke. The Butcher Boy concludes with an outcome that's either tragic or hilarious depending on your perspective and how much you've had to drink. The girl's reputation is ruined, the Butcher Boy has moved to the next village, and the moral of the story is either don't trust charming boys or life's unfair or possibly wasn't that a great rhyme scheme though? Nobody seems particularly moved by the tragic elements. They're too busy calling for the next song. The barley mow, someone shouts, and this is greeted with universal approval. The fiddler obliges, and you immediately understand why this one's popular. It's a drinking song with a cumulative verse structure that gets progressively more complicated and requires progressively more concentration that drunk people don't have. Each verse adds a new container for the ale, starting with a nipperkin, tiny, and working up through pints, quarts, half-gallons, gallons, barrels, and eventually containers that don't actually exist, but sound impressive when you're shouting them. The fun is watching people try to remember the sequence while drunk. Here's to the barley mow, my boys, here's to the barley mow. We'll drink it out of the jolly brown bowl, and the half-gallon and the gallon and the... Wait, what comes before gallon? Someone helps them out, they continue. Everyone laughs when someone inevitably messes up the order. It's participatory, it's forgiving of mistakes, and it's an excuse to keep drinking while singing about drinking. Recursive entertainment. The apprentices are absolutely destroying the verses, getting maybe 1 in 3 containers right, but they're singing with such conviction that nobody cares. The old man who's been sitting in his chair since before recorded history apparently knows every verse perfectly, and is singing them with his eyes closed, possibly from muscle memory alone. The labourers are doing a call and response thing where one shouts the container and the others repeat it, which works until they all forget simultaneously and have to start over. Next up is something that doesn't even pretend to have a title that's appropriate for mixed company. The fiddler pauses, glances at the tavern keeper's wife, receives a shrug that says they're going to sing it anyway, and launches into what can only be described as a song about professions and anatomy, and situations that definitely shouldn't involve either. The metaphors here aren't even trying. A miller's daughter, a soldier's equipment, consequences that are described, in terms that would make a physician blush. You're learning verses you'll absolutely pretend not to remember tomorrow, but right now, in this moment, surrounded by people singing enthusiastically about subjects that shouldn't be enthusiastic, it's weirdly communal. Shared debauchery creates bonds, apparently. You're not singing, you don't know the words, and you're not quite drunk enough to fake it, but you're grinning despite yourself because the absurdity of 30 people belting out progressively dirtier verses in a smoke-filled room is objectively funny. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some ballads from this period were considered so scandalous that printers would publish them with certain verses replaced by asterisks or la la la, which fooled absolutely nobody, and probably made them more popular because forbidden fruit and all that. Whether the versions being sung tonight match the printed versions is doubtful. The oral tradition has added embellishments that no printer would touch. Historians still argue whether bawdy songs were genuinely as widespread as evidence suggests, or if they were simply more likely to be remembered and recorded precisely because they were scandalous, creating a preservation bias. But looking around this room, watching people who probably can't read enthusiastically singing verses they definitely didn't learn in church, you're voting for genuinely widespread. The gentleman who probably isn't knows all the words to the dirty songs, which is deeply telling about something. The merchant is pretending to be scandalized while secretly enjoying himself. The woman dancing alone earlier is now singing along with gusto, apparently having decided that propriety can wait until morning. Even the card players have abandoned their game entirely and joined in. The songs blend together now. Another drinking song, another ballad about romantic misadventures, another tune where the chorus is just everybody shouting "Hey!" at strategic moments. The fiddler's arm must be getting tired, but he shows no signs of slowing down. The piper is red-faced from blowing into his instrument. The drummer is maintaining that steady beat like his life depends on it, which, given the crowd's momentum, it might. The singing eventually exhausts itself, or more accurately, the musicians need a break before their arms fall off. And as the last notes of whatever that song was fade into the general din, a different kind of energy takes over. The music provided cover for a lot of activities, And now that it's paused, you notice the side businesses that have been operating this whole time, specifically the gambling. Because of course there's gambling. There's always gambling when you combine alcohol, spare coins, and human nature's eternal optimism about luck. The card players you noticed earlier are back to their game with renewed focus, their brief musical interlude over. Their table has acquired spectators, 3 or 4 people standing behind the players, watching the hands with the intensity usually reserved for matters of life and death. Money is visible now, stacked in small piles in front of each player, mostly pennies and halfpennies, but you spot a few silver pieces that suggest the stakes have escalated from friendly wager to someone's going home unhappy. The cards themselves are fascinating if you can get close enough to see them. Hand-painted, worn soft at the edges from use, each one slightly different because mass production is still a fantasy. These aren't the slick plastic-coated rectangles of your time. These are thick paper or thin wood, painted with care but not precision, and they've been handled by so many fingers that the original colours are fading into general brownness. The kings look vaguely regal, the queens look vaguely female, and the suits are identifiable if you squint and use your imagination. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Card games in this period range from simple games of chance to complex strategy games, with gambling on the outcomes being completely normal despite periodic legal restrictions. Playing cards themselves were taxed, which made them a small luxury, and owning a decent deck was a sign of having disposable income. These players aren't wealthy, but they're not destitute either. You edge closer to watch, and the dynamics become clear quickly. The man with the smooth hands is definitely the best player. His face reveals nothing, his movements are economical, and he's winning steadily but not dramatically. That's important. Win too, obviously, and people get suspicious or stop playing. Win gradually and they think they just need one more hand to turn it around. The scarred man is losing but doesn't seem to care much, which suggests either he can afford it or he's playing for the social aspect rather than profit. The third player, the one who keeps adjusting his hat, is losing badly and does care. His jaw is clenched, his pile of coins is shrinking, and you can see him doing the mental calculation of whether to quit while he still has rent money or risk it all on the next hand. The game itself is one you don't recognise. The rules are clearly understood by the players but mysterious to you. Cards are being laid down in patterns, picked up, discarded, with much thought given to each decision. Someone wins a hand, the smooth-handed man naturally, and scoops up the pot with practised efficiency. The coins disappear into his purse with barely a clink. He's done this before. Meanwhile, across the room, dice have appeared. Because cards aren't the only vice available tonight. 3 men are crouched against the wall, and the distinctive rattle and roll sound of bone dice on flagstone cuts through the ambient noise. Dice games are more democratic than cards. You don't need to know complex rules, just bet on numbers and hope. Which makes them more dangerous, really, because the barrier to losing your money is much lower. The dice themselves are crude cubes of bone, the dots carved deep and filled with some dark substance so you can read them. They're not perfectly balanced. Perfect cubes weren't exactly the manufacturing standard in 1670-something, which means luck is even more variable than it should be, or less variable if the dice are weighted intentionally, which is absolutely something that happens. You watch several throws and you swear one die is landing on 6 more often than probability would suggest. But maybe that's just paranoia. Or maybe you're watching someone cheat in real time and nobody's calling them on it, because proving dice are loaded is harder than it looks. The betting is fast and loose. 3 pence on evens, someone shouts, 6 on odds. The dice clatter, bounce, settle. Someone wins, someone loses, coins change hands, and immediately they're setting up the next throw. The pace is almost frantic. This isn't careful strategy like the card game. This is rapid-fire gambling that could empty your purse in minutes if you're not careful. Here's your quirky tidbit. Loaded dice have been found in archaeological digs dating back to Roman times and probably earlier. Humans have been cheating at dice games for literally thousands of years, which is either depressing or comforting depending on your perspective. The techniques were well known in this period: weight one side with lead, shave the edges, round certain corners, and the counter techniques were equally well known. Trust nobody's dice but your own. A new game starts at one of the tables, this one involving a cup, 3 dice, and rules that seem to change based on who's explaining them. The tavern keeper is watching these proceedings with benign oversight. He's not stopping the gambling, that would be bad for business, but he's making sure it doesn't get out of hand. The moment someone accuses someone else of cheating, or the stakes get high enough that a loss might mean violence, he'll step in. Until then, let the people gamble. They're drinking more while they play, and that's the real profit centre anyway. You notice the woman who was eating and dancing earlier has joined a dice game. She's betting conservatively, just a penny here and there, and she's treating it like entertainment rather than income opportunity. Smart. The apprentices are watching the card game with fascination and probably dreaming of the day they can afford to lose money on cards like grown-ups. The locals know better than to play against the smooth-handed man. They've seen him work before. Historians still argue whether tavern gambling was genuinely as widespread and problematic as moralistic sources claimed, or if those sources were exaggerating for effect. But watching money flow across these tables and listening to the dice clatter, you're inclined to believe the moralists had a point. This is absolutely where people come to lose their wages, their common sense, and occasionally their dignity. The gambling continues its chaotic rhythm, but now another layer adds itself to the evening's tapestry. Conversation. Not the idle chatter that's been happening all night, but actual information exchange. Because taverns aren't just drinking establishments or gambling dens or impromptu concert halls, they're news networks. In a world without newspapers for most people, without radio, without any way to know what's happening beyond your own village except through human contact, taverns are where information flows, and flows, and flows, with varying degrees of accuracy. The merchant who's been nursing his wine and his anxiety all evening suddenly becomes the centre of attention at his table. Someone's asked him about London, and he's off. You can hear him from across the room, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who's been waiting all night to establish their authority on a subject. The king's certainly spending, he's saying, leaning back with the confidence of someone who's actually been to the capital recently. New buildings going up near Whitehall, French fashions everywhere, and the theatres, well, the theatres are thriving again, whatever the Puritans think about it. The restoration is still relatively recent. Charles II has been back on the throne for less than 2 decades, and people are still processing what that means. The merchant continues, warming to his theme. Saw a play myself, actually. The Country Wife, or some such. Scandalous stuff, but everyone's going. Ladies wearing masks, pretending they're there by accident. He's definitely embellishing, making himself more sophisticated than he probably is, but nobody's challenging him because London might as well be a foreign country for most people here. Who's to say what's true and what's wishful thinking? Here's your mainstream historical fact. Taverns served as crucial information hubs in this period, with travellers, peddlers, and official messengers all stopping to share news. Before the widespread distribution of printed news sheets, oral transmission was how most people learned about events beyond their immediate area. The reliability of this information was, to put it charitably, variable. One of the locals interrupts the merchant's monologue with news of more immediate interest. Heard the harvest is good over Dorset Way, might mean prices come down finally. This triggers a whole discussion about grain prices, weather patterns, and whose crops failed this year. It's less exotic than London theatre gossip, but it's more relevant to people whose lives depend on bread prices staying stable. The conversation fragments into smaller debates. Someone thinks the prices won't drop because merchants are greedy, pointed look at the merchant who pretends not to notice. Someone else insists the weather's been too wet and everything will rot before it reaches market. The carter, who's been silent most of the evening, suddenly contributes. Roads are bad between here and Bristol. Saw 2 carts stuck just yesterday. 1 broken axle. Whatever's coming from the ports is going to be delayed. This is valuable intelligence delivered in a flat, factual tone. He's not embellishing. He has no reason to. He just saw what he saw, and now others know about it. The merchant makes a mental note because this affects his business. The tavern keeper makes a mental note because this affects when his wine shipment arrives. Then the conversation takes a darker turn. Someone mentions the plague, always the plague, lurking in the background of every conversation in this era like an unwelcome relative. Heard there's sickness in Portsmouth, says one of the labourers, and the room quiets slightly. Plague rumours travel fast and cause panic faster. Just rumour though, he adds quickly, reading the room. Probably just regular fever. Always someone claiming plague when it's just a bad cough. The woman who's been eating, dancing and gambling chimes in with her own contribution. My sister's in Portsmouth. No plague. She'd have written. This reassurance settles things somewhat, though everyone knows letters can be delayed or lost, but the fact that someone has recent intelligence from an actual human in Portsmouth is comforting. The conversation moves on, but you notice a few people making mental notes to avoid Portsmouth for a while, just in case. News from the continent surfaces next. The gentleman who probably isn't suddenly has opinions about French politics, delivered with the kind of confidence that suggests he read something once and is now an expert. Louis is expanding again, mark my words, building up forces along the borders. We'll be at war before the year's out. Whether this is based on actual intelligence or just the general knowledge that France and England being at war is the default state of affairs, you can't tell. Nobody challenges him though, because continental politics is another area where verification is impossible and strong opinions are cheap. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some taverns supposedly had news tables where travellers would be encouraged to share information, with drinks on the house for particularly interesting news. Whether that's true or apocryphal, it captures the reality that information had value, and tavern keepers were willing to invest in getting it. The local gossip is simultaneously more entertaining and more vicious. The conversation shifts to people everyone knows, and the knives come out. Someone's daughter is pregnant and the father is definitely not her husband. Someone's son has been seen gambling away money that should be paying debts. The squire's new horse is lame already, proving he's a terrible judge of horseflesh. The parson was drunk last Sunday. Absolutely drunk, don't let anyone tell you different. Each piece of gossip is delivered with relish, received with interest, and will be transmitted onwards to the next person who'll listen. The tavern keeper's wife contributes her own intelligence. Miller's raising his prices again, 3rd time this year. This is met with general disgust and a discussion of whether the miller is greedy, incompetent, or justified, with the consensus being all three. Someone suggests taking grain to the next village's mill. Someone else points out that's a day's journey and not worth it for a small saving. The economic realities of rural life play out in real time. Historians still argue whether tavern gossip genuinely shaped public opinion or just reflected existing attitudes. But listening to this conversation flow and evolve, you're seeing information being processed, interpreted, and transformed into community knowledge. The truth is becoming negotiable. Facts are being selected for narrative convenience, and by tomorrow, half of what's being said tonight will be remembered differently by different people. As you watch the various interactions playing out around you, the gambling, the gossip, the drinking, the occasional raised voice that quiets itself before escalating, you start to notice patterns. There are rules here. Not written rules, not posted on a sign, not enforced by any legal authority, but rules nonetheless. The kind of social contract that keeps 30 drunk people in a confined space from descending into complete chaos. Well, from descending into more chaos than is already happening. First and most fundamental, you don't insult the tavern keeper's wife. Ever. Under any circumstances. Doesn't matter if you're drunk, doesn't matter if you think you're being funny, doesn't matter if she actually did something worth criticism. You keep your mouth shut. You just watch this rule in action when one of the labourers made a comment about the stew being oversalted. The tavern keeper's wife turned, fixed him with a look that could freeze blood, and he immediately backpedaled. Not that it isn't good, mind you, just saying it's got proper flavour is all. Crisis averted. The rule holds because the tavern keeper's wife has the authority to have you thrown out, ban you permanently, or spread word about you to every tavern in the region. Also, she's probably armed with at least a kitchen knife, and her husband definitely won't side with you. Second rule, fights happen, but they follow protocols. You can't just start throwing punches because someone looked at you wrong. There's an escalation ladder. First, you exchange words, insults, challenges, positioning. This gives everyone a chance to assess the situation and decide if it's worth intervening. If the dispute continues, you might move to shoving, some aggressive posturing, maybe knocking over a cup. Still recoverable. The tavern keeper is watching but not yet involved. If it progresses to actual violence, fists swinging, furniture becoming weapons, then he steps in and you both get thrown out into the rain. Nobody wants that, so most disputes settle before they reach actual bloodshed. You're watching this. Play out right now, actually. Two men at the dice game are having a disagreement about whether a throw counted when one die fell on someone's foot. Voices are rising. That's my coin. The throw stands. They're standing now, facing each other, and the room's attention has shifted toward them like iron filings to a magnet. The tavern keeper moves closer, not intervening yet, just positioning himself. One of the other dice players says something conciliatory. "Let's throw again, fresh start, everyone puts in new bets." The two angry men consider this. Someone offers to buy them both ale. The tension breaks. They sit. The rule held, de-escalate when possible, because getting thrown out means losing access to warmth, ale, and entertainment. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tavern violence was actually less common than contemporary moralistic literature suggested, partly because these informal social rules were quite effective at maintaining order. Most establishments had regulars who had a vested interest in keeping things calm enough that the tavern didn't get shut down or acquire a dangerous reputation that scared away customers. Third rule, you can be drunk, but there are types of drunk that are acceptable and types that aren't. Merry drunk is fine, loud, laughing, generous with buying rounds, maybe dancing badly or singing off key. That's entertainment, and everyone tolerates it. Weepy drunk is tolerated with less patience, but still allowed as long as you're not bothering specific people with your sorrows. Angry drunk, however, is on thin ice. The moment your drunkenness makes you aggressive or confrontational, you're becoming a problem. The tavern keeper has already identified one person approaching angry drunk. That's the card player who's been losing steadily. And he's watching closely, ready to cut him off or eject him the moment he crosses the line. Fourth rule, your gambling debts are real and everyone's watching. You can't just lose at cards or dice and then claim you never agreed to the bet or don't have the money. The social pressure here is immense. The gamblers aren't just playing against each other, they're performing for an audience of witnesses who will remember if you welch on a bet. That becomes your reputation. Oh, him? He doesn't pay his debts, won't play with him. In a small community where reputation is currency, that's devastating. So people pay up even when it hurts, because the alternative is worse. Fifth rule, certain seats are claimed by custom, and you don't take them without permission. That chair by the fire where the old man has been sitting, that's his chair. Has been for probably 20 years. You sit there and he won't fight you for it. He's too old for that. But everyone in the room will judge you as rude and ignorant. The locals know the hierarchy of seating, who gets priority for the good spots near the fire, who's expected to make room when someone more established enters. As a traveller, you're automatically at the bottom of this hierarchy. You get what's left after everyone else is settled. Sixth rule, you don't ask too many questions about people's business. Someone's occupation, where they're headed, general pleasantries, all fine. But probing into specifics, trying to find out exactly what's in that merchant's satchel, or why that woman is travelling alone, or what that gentleman's actual social status is, that's crossing a line. Privacy is respected not out of politeness, but out of mutual self-interest. Everyone here has something they'd rather not discuss, so an unspoken agreement exists. You don't interrogate me, I don't interrogate you, we all drink our ale in peace. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some taverns supposedly had fighting rooms or outdoor areas specifically designated for settling disputes, theoretically to keep the violence from damaging the main room's furniture and disturbing other customers. Whether this was common practice or just wishful thinking from tavern keepers, tired of replacing broken benches, nobody knows for sure. Seventh rule, certain topics are off limits in mixed or unknown company. Religion is dangerous territory. This is still within living memory of the Civil War, and people have strong opinions about Puritans, Catholics, and proper worship that can turn violent fast. Politics is similarly fraught. You can complain about taxes or local authorities in general terms, but specific political allegiances should be stated carefully or not at all. You never know who in the room might have connections to power or different loyalties. Historians still argue whether these informal codes were genuinely effective at preventing violence, or if tavern brawls were simply underreported in historical records compared to moralizing complaints about them. But watching the careful dance of social interaction happening around you, you're impressed by how well it works. 30 people, many drunk, confined space, weapons readily available, everyone's got a knife, and yet things remain mostly peaceful through nothing but shared understanding of boundaries. The card game continues without further incident. The dice rattle, conversations flow, the rules invisible but present, keeping chaos at bay. The unspoken rules you just mentally catalogued, they work right up until they don't, and you're about to witness the moment when the careful social equilibrium tips toward chaos, because someone always pushes too far, misreads the room, or simply doesn't care about consequences. Tonight's catalyst is actually happening right now, and you almost miss it because it's so smoothly executed. The merchant with the worried expression and the valuable satchel has made a critical error. He's gotten comfortable. 3 cups of wine will do that. He's been holding that satchel like a lifeline all evening, clutching it against his side, but now he's set it down on the bench beside him, while he gestures enthusiastically about London, theatre prices. His guard is down, his attention is elsewhere, and someone has noticed. The pickpocket is good. You only spot him because you happen to be looking in exactly the right direction at exactly the right moment. He's been sitting 2 tables over for the past hour, looking like just another traveller, nursing his ale slowly, not drawing attention. Now he stands, stretches like he's just stiff from sitting, and navigates through the crowd with the casual ease of someone heading to the privy or getting more ale. Except his path takes him past the merchant's table, and his hand, this is the beautiful part, brushes the satchel with the lightest touch as he passes, testing weight, checking the clasp, gathering intelligence. He doesn't take it. Not yet. That would be obvious. Instead, he continues to the bar, orders another ale he probably won't drink, and positions himself with a clear line of sight to the merchant's table. He's waiting for the perfect moment, and you're watching it happen in real time, torn between fascination at the technique and horror at being complicit through inaction. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Theft in taverns was common enough that many establishments had strict policies about where valuables could be stored, and travellers were advised to sleep with their money and important documents on their person. The combination of alcohol, dim lighting, crowded conditions, and strangers from multiple regions made taverns ideal hunting grounds for thieves. You should probably warn the merchant. You're considering it, weighing the social awkwardness of interfering against the moral obligation of preventing theft, when the situation resolves itself in an unexpected way. The merchant's hand reaches for his satchel, just a casual check, the paranoia that's been serving him well all evening reasserting itself, and finds it still there. He pulls it closer, looping the strap over his shoulder this time, and the pickpocket's opportunity evaporates. The thief sees this, makes a quick calculation, and decides this particular mark isn't worth the increased risk. He abandons his barely touched ale and slips out into the night, cutting his losses. Crisis averted by accident. But the evening's supply of trouble hasn't been exhausted yet. Because over at the card game, something's gone very wrong. The player who's been losing steadily, the one adjusting his hat, the one the tavern keeper's been watching, has apparently reached his limit. Not his financial limit. He passed that 3 hands ago, his emotional limit. The point where reason gives way to desperation, and desperation gives way to accusation. You're cheating. The words cut through the ambient noise like a knife through butter. The music's stopped, the musicians are taking a break, so there's no cover. Just those 2 words, flat and accusatory, hanging in the air like smoke. The room doesn't go silent, that only happens in stories, but the quality of the noise changes. Conversation's quiet slightly. Attention shifts. The smooth-handed card player, the one who's been winning steadily all night, doesn't react immediately. He sets down his cards with deliberate care, takes a sip of his ale, and only then looks up at his accuser. His face is still neutral, professional, but there's an edge to it now. Careful what you say next. I said you're cheating. Marked cards or sleight of hand, I don't know which, but you're cheating. The accuser is standing now, swaying slightly. Definitely drunk, definitely angry, definitely past the point where de-escalation is easy. I want my money back. This is it. This is the line. Accusing someone of cheating at cards isn't just an insult. It's calling someone a thief and a liar to their face in front of witnesses. It demands response. The smooth-handed player stands slowly, his chair scraping back. He's not big, but he's got the kind of controlled stillness that suggests he knows how to handle himself. I play fair. You play badly. There's a difference. The room is definitely quieter now. The other gamblers have backed away from the table, taking their money with them because when violence starts, coins have a way of disappearing in the confusion. The spectators are torn between moving to safety and staying close enough to see what happens. Human nature and entertainment value war with common sense. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some professional gamblers supposedly carried small weapons designed specifically for the close quarters fighting that erupted over disputed card games. Palm daggers, weighted rings, even sharpened coins. Whether the smooth-handed player is armed with anything beyond his regular knife, you can't tell, but he's standing like someone who's been through this before. The tavern keeper is moving now, not rushing but definitely closing the distance with purpose. His wife is also repositioning, and you notice for the first time that she's got a wooden cudgel in her hand. Short, heavy, the kind of thing that settles arguments conclusively. Their son is blocking the door, not overtly, just happening to stand there in a way that makes casual exit difficult. This family has a protocol for exactly this situation. Outside. The tavern keeper's voice has authority that wasn't present when he was serving ale. You want to fight, you do it outside, not in my establishment. The accuser turns on him, alcohol and anger making him stupid. He's a cheat and you probably know it, probably getting a cut. This is a catastrophic misjudgment. You just watch someone violate the cardinal rule. Don't insult the tavern keeper or his family. The room's sympathy, such as it was, evaporates instantly. Even if the smooth-handed player is cheating, even if the tavern keeper is getting a cut, you don't say it out loud. You certainly don't say it in front of everyone. The tavern keeper's expression doesn't change. Out. Now. Or I throw you out, and you're banned from here and every tavern that'll listen to me, which is most of them within 3 days' ride. Historians still argue whether tavern keepers genuinely maintained regional networks for sharing information about troublemakers, or if that was just a threat they used for intimidation, but watching the accuser's face, you can see he believes it. And belief is what matters. His anger is colliding with the reality of consequences, and you can see him doing the math. Fight here, make enemies, get banned from taverns, become persona non grata across the region, or leave now, curse them all in the morning, move on with life. The accuser makes his choice. You can see it happen in real time. The anger draining out of him, replaced by sullen resentment and the awareness that he's badly miscalculated. He grabs what's left of his coins from the table, shoves them in his purse with shaking hands, and mutters something that's probably profane but too quiet to make out clearly. Then he's pushing through the crowd toward the door, not quite running, but definitely not lingering. The tavern keeper's son steps aside just enough to let him pass, and then he's gone into the night, the door slamming behind him with a finality that announces that particular drama is over. The room exhales collectively. Conversations resume, though the card game doesn't restart immediately. The smooth-handed player is packing up his cards with deliberate care, and the other gamblers are reading the room to see if it's safe to continue or if the vibe is broken. The tavern keeper returns to his station behind the barrels. His wife puts away the cudgel, and just like that, normalcy reasserts itself. The brief flirtation with violence is over, absorbed into the tavern's ongoing story as just another Tuesday night. But something's changed. The energy is different now. You notice it gradually. The room feels less intense, less packed, less relentlessly loud. Some of that is literal. Several people have left, either spooked by the near-fight or simply done with their evening. The 2 apprentices are gone, probably terrified they'd be recognised and reported to their masters. One of the labourers is slumped over his table, not quite passed out, but definitely not participating anymore. The merchant has finished his wine and is eyeing the stairs to the sleeping chambers with the expression of someone calculating whether the beds are worth the price or if sleeping in a stable would be less horrifying. The fire is burning lower, not dramatically. The tavern keeper's son adds another log while you're watching, but you can see it's past its peak. Earlier in the evening, the flames were leaping, almost aggressive in their heat output. Now they're settling into a steadier burn, less spectacular, but more sustainable. The light in the room shifts with it, becoming less dramatic, more gentle. Shadows are deeper now, the corners of the room fading into darkness that the remaining candles can't quite penetrate. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Taverns typically closed when the watch called curfew, or when the keeper decided business was done for the night, usually around 10 or 11 o'clock. Staying open later risked attention from authorities who associated late-night drinking with disorder and crime. Of course, authorities being what they were, many taverns pushed these boundaries, but there was always a calculation involved. The tavern keeper is making that calculation right now. You can see him assessing, looking at who's left, how much they're drinking, whether keeping the place open another hour is worth the candle cost, the firewood, the staff's exhaustion. His wife joins him in this silent evaluation, and some wordless communication passes between them. Not yet, maybe another half hour. Let people finish what they're drinking, extract those last few pennies, then begin the closing ritual. The musicians have definitely called it a night. The fiddler is carefully wrapping his instrument back in its cloth bag, and the piper and drummer have simply vanished, probably heading home while the heading was good. The absence of music makes everything seem quieter, even though the actual volume hasn't dropped that much. It just feels like the party's over, even if the drinking continues. The serving girl, the tavern keeper's daughter, is already beginning cleanup, moving through the room collecting abandoned cups and bowls. She's got a wooden tray stacked precariously high, with leather jacks and pewter tankards, navigating around remaining customers with practiced efficiency. Some of the bowls still have food remnants in them, and you try not to think about what happens to those remnants. They probably go to the pigs. Hopefully they go to the pigs. The locals are the last holdouts, naturally. They've got nowhere more interesting to be, and they've paced their drinking well enough that they're not yet ready for bed. That old man in his chair by the fire, still there, still nursing what might be his 5th cup or might be his 2nd, depending on how long he's been making each one last. The cluster of regulars near the hearth are deep in conversation about something. Probably the same conversation they have every night, with minor variations for current events. You notice the temperature in the room is dropping. With the fire lower and the crowd thinner, the heat that was almost oppressive earlier is now merely comfortable and trending toward chilly. The drafts you didn't notice when you were surrounded by warm bodies are becoming apparent. That door doesn't seal perfectly, neither do the shutters. The cold outside is patient, waiting for the fire to die down enough to reassert itself. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some taverns supposedly had arrangements with the local watch, where a small payment ensured the watch didn't notice when closing time was being ignored. Whether such corruption was widespread, or just assumed to be widespread because people wanted to believe authority figures were as venal as everyone else, nobody really knows. But watching the tavern keeper glance toward the door like he's expecting someone official, you wouldn't be surprised if he's got exactly such an arrangement. The woman who was eating and dancing and gambling earlier is gathering her things. A small bag, a cloak even more worn than yours, preparing to head upstairs to whatever sleeping accommodation she's negotiated. She looks tired now, the evening's energy drained away, leaving someone who just wants a horizontal surface and some quiet. The carter left at some point without you noticing, probably heading to the stables to sleep near his horses and his cart because the man lives for his work. The card players have finally packed it in. The smooth-handed professional is counting his winnings with satisfaction. That's professional rather than gleeful. This is just another day's work for him. The scarred man who lost without caring is sharing a final drink with someone, laughing about something, apparently untroubled by his lighter purse. The third player, the one who lost badly and didn't accuse anyone of cheating because he had more sense than the earlier accuser, is sitting alone staring into his cup like it contains answers to life's mysteries. It doesn't. It contains the dregs of ale and probably some sediment. Historians still argue whether the atmosphere in historical taverns genuinely shifted this dramatically as evenings wound down, or if accounts are projecting backwards from modern bar-closing dynamics. But experiencing it firsthand, you can confirm the vibe absolutely changes. The aggression and energy of peak evening gives way to something gentler, more melancholy even. People are tired, drunk tired, which is its own special category of exhaustion. The tavern keeper starts snuffing some of the candles, not all of them, but the ones that are burning in areas nobody's using anymore. Each extinguished flame makes the room a little darker, a little more intimate, a little more like it's time to think about bed. It's a gentle hint, this candle extinguishing. A suggestion that the evening has an end point approaching. The candle extinguishing is working its psychological magic. You're tired. Actually tired, not just tavern atmosphere tired. The day's travel is catching up with you, the ale is making you pleasantly drowsy, and the prospect of lying down anywhere sounds increasingly appealing. Time to negotiate for sleeping space, which you've been dreading since you walked in because you know how this works. Or rather, you know it's going to be nothing like what getting a room means in your regular life. You approach the tavern keeper, who's wiping down the bar area with a rag that's redistributing grime more than removing it. "Looking for a bed," you say, trying to sound like you know what you're asking for while being fully aware you don't. He doesn't even look up. 3p for a space in the common room, 6p for a bed in a shared chamber, shilling if you want a chamber to yourself, but we're full, so that's not happening tonight. The prices are stated like they're carved in stone, which they probably are. This isn't a negotiation. This is a take-it-or-leave-it situation, and leaving it means sleeping in a stable or under a hedge in the rain. Shared chamber, you say, because 3p for a space in the common room sounds like a spot on the floor near the fire with 12 snoring strangers, and a shilling for privacy isn't an option anyway. 6p disappears from your purse. That's half a day's wages for a labourer, by the way. So cheap this is not. And he jerks his thumb toward the stairs. Second door on the left. Candles in the hall. Don't steal anything. Don't start fires. Privy's out back if you need it. This is the extent of his customer service, and honestly it's more than you expected. You head for the stairs, which are steep, narrow and worn in the middle from centuries of feet. The wood creaks ominously under your weight, and you grip the rough wooden handrail while hoping the whole structure doesn't collapse. It doesn't. Probably. The second floor is dark except for a single tallow candle guttering in a sconce, casting shadows that make the hallway look like something from a nightmare. The ceiling is even lower up here. You can reach up and touch the beams without stretching. The smell is different too. Less smoke and ale, more unwashed human and damp wool and chamber pots that haven't been emptied recently. You find the second door on the left. Take a breath to prepare yourself for whatever's behind it, and push it open. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Shared sleeping arrangements were completely normal in this period, even for people who weren't desperately poor. Privacy as a concept was largely reserved for the wealthy, and even they often shared chambers with servants or family members. The idea that each person deserves their own sleeping space wouldn't become standard for another few centuries. The chamber is generous. It's a room maybe 12 feet square with a ceiling that slopes dramatically because you're under the thatched roof. 2 beds dominate the space, and beds is also generous. They're wooden frames with rope supports, topped with straw-stuffed mattresses that have seen better days. Better years, probably. Each bed is wide enough for 2 people if those people don't mind being very close to each other, which they will mind, but that's not the tavern's problem. One bed already has an occupant, a shape under a blanket, snoring with the rattling enthusiasm of someone who's either deeply asleep or deeply drunk, possibly both. You can't see their face, just a lump under rough wool, and that's probably for the best. The other bed is empty, or at least appears to be in the dim light filtering in from the hallway. This is your bed for the night, shared with whoever else the tavern keeper sends up here. The floor is bare wood, gaps between the boards wide enough that you can probably see down to the room below if you look. The walls are the same wattle and daub as downstairs, rough and stained, with no decoration except a wooden peg for hanging cloaks. There's a small window, no glass, just shutters that are currently closed against the rain and cold. A chamber pot lurks in the corner, and you're very carefully not examining its contents or considering when it was last emptied. The bed itself requires closer inspection, though part of you doesn't want to know. You set down the candle you grabbed from the hallway and lean over to examine your sleeping situation. The mattress, and you're using that term loosely, is a canvas sack stuffed with straw. You can feel the individual stalks poking through the fabric when you press on it. The straw rustles and shifts and something small scurries away inside it. You're choosing to believe that was just the straw settling. Just the straw. Definitely just the straw. The blanket is wool, heavy and scratchy, and it smells like every person who slept under it for the past month, which is probably accurate. There's no sheet. Sheets are for rich people. You get straw, blanket, and whatever you're wearing. Speaking of which, you're absolutely sleeping in your clothes. Taking anything off in this environment seems like inviting disaster, cold, theft, inappropriate attention, or just general discomfort. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some travellers supposedly slept with their valuables in their boots, which they then used as pillows, making theft difficult and ensuring they'd wake up if someone tried to rob them. You're seriously considering this strategy, looking at the snoring stranger in the other bed and wondering about their honesty levels. You sit on the edge of the bed to test it, and the ropes supporting the mattress groan in protest but hold. The whole structure is rickety, built for function not comfort, and you're going to feel every bit of it by morning. The mattress compresses under you with a sound like aggressive whispering. All that straw shifting and crackling. Comfortable this is not. Better than the ground this is marginally. Historians still argue whether shared beds in taverns led to genuine cross-class mixing and information exchange, or if people generally tried to share with others of similar status when possible. But looking at your sleeping companion, you have no idea what class they are or whether you're about to spend the night next to a labourer, a merchant, or someone with even less reputable occupation. The door opens behind you, and you turn to see who else is joining this intimate gathering. It's the carter from downstairs, the one who smells of horse and looks like weathered leather. He nods at you, acknowledgement, not greeting, and claims the other side of your bed without discussion. This is happening. You're sharing a bed with a stranger who you've never spoken to, and this is completely normal. The carter wastes no time with pleasantries or negotiations about sleeping arrangements. He simply sits on his side of the bed, claiming a good 2/3 of the available space by your estimation, removes his boots with practiced efficiency, and lies down fully clothed, pulling the blanket over himself with the air of someone who's done this 1,000 times in 1,000 different taverns. Within minutes, he's adding his snoring to the symphony already being performed by the person in the other bed. You're starting to understand that sleep tonight will be an aspirational goal rather than an achievable reality. You remove your own boots, keeping them close, valuables tucked inside just like the wisdom suggests, and attempt to claim your portion of the bed. The carter has already migrated toward the centre, either unconsciously or with the strategic territorial instinct of a professional traveller. You're left with maybe 18 inches of mattress width, right at the edge where one wrong move will dump you onto the floor. The edge position also means you get the full benefit of the draft coming through the gap between the wall and the window shutter. Cold air is trickling in with dedication, finding every exposed bit of skin. You arrange yourself as best you can, lying on your side because there's no room for your back, pulling the blanket up to your chin and immediately regretting touching it with your face because the smell is even worse up close. The straw mattress crackles with every tiny movement, and you're acutely aware of how many generations of straw and how many previous occupants have compressed and contributed to this particular sleeping surface. The rope support beneath sags dramatically under your combined weight, creating a valley in the middle that both you and the carter are sliding toward despite your best efforts to resist gravity. Your head is resting on, well, nothing really. Pillows are not provided. Some people brought their own. You can see the carter's wadded up coat serving that purpose, but you didn't think that far ahead. You try using your own cloak as a pillow, but it's still damp from the rain and smells of wet wool and travel. You fold it anyway, stuff it under your head, and try to find a position that doesn't make your neck hurt immediately. This fails. Your neck hurts immediately. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The phrase "sleep tight" supposedly originated from the need to periodically tighten the rope supports under mattresses to keep them from sagging excessively. Whether this etymology is accurate or apocryphal, historians debate, but lying here feeling these ropes strain under you, it makes perfect sense. These ropes need tightening, desperately. They probably needed tightening a year ago. The snoring situation is truly impressive in its diversity. The person in the other bed, still unidentified, still just a lump under blankets, has a deep, rattling snore with occasional pauses that make you think they've stopped breathing, followed by explosive snorts that prove they haven't. The carter beside you snores on a different rhythm entirely, a higher-pitched wheeze punctuated by lip-smacking sounds. They're not synchronized, they're competing, each trying to outsnore the other in different keys and tempos. You're lying between them like an unwilling audience to a very niche avant-garde musical performance. You try closing your eyes and embracing sleep, but your body has questions, important questions. Like, why is the straw poking through the mattress directly into your hip bone? Why is that particular spot somehow sharper than all the other spots? You shift position, and now the straw is poking your shoulder instead. Better? Debatable. The blanket is heavy enough to make you hot despite the cold draft, but not quite covering enough to prevent that draft from finding the gap at your neck. You're simultaneously too warm and too cold, which seems physically impossible but is definitely happening. The sounds from downstairs are still audible, muffled voices, the occasional scrape of furniture, footsteps on the floorboards below. The tavern keeper and his family are closing up for the night, and you can track their progress through audio alone. Someone's banking the fire, someone else is moving barrels. The remaining customers are being encouraged to finish up and leave, or head to their own sleeping arrangements. The tavern's nighttime routine is playing out beneath you, transmitted through the floorboards like a very boring radio drama. New sounds emerge as the building settles into night mode. The timbers creak and groan with temperature changes, cooling down after the heat of the crowded evening, contracting slightly, releasing small pops and cracks that sound alarmingly like footsteps when you're trying to sleep. The thatch roof rustles when wind hits it. Rain is still falling, a steady patter that would be soothing if you weren't hyper-aware that you're sleeping under organic material that's supposed to keep water out, but definitely has limits. Something scurries in the walls. Mice, probably. Hopefully mice. The building is old enough and rural enough that mice are inevitable, and you're choosing to be philosophical about sharing space with rodents, rather than panicking about it. The carter doesn't react to the scurrying sounds at all, which either means he's genuinely asleep or so accustomed to mice that they don't register as noteworthy. You're trying to adopt his Zen attitude. You're failing, but you're trying. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some period sources suggest that travellers would sometimes deliberately get drunk before bed specifically to help them sleep through the discomfort and noise of shared tavern chambers. Looking at your current situation, uncomfortable bed, snoring companions, mysterious scurrying, cold draft, you're beginning to understand this strategy. Should have had that extra ale. Your bedmate the carter shifts in his sleep, rolling over, and his elbow catches you in the ribs. Not hard, just enough to be annoying and remind you that personal space is a modern luxury. He doesn't wake up, doesn't apologise, just settles into his new position, which somehow claims even more of the bed. You're now occupying maybe 12 inches of mattress, pressed against the edge, one leg dangling slightly off the side because there's simply no room. This is fine. Everything is fine. This is just how people slept in the 17th century. Historians still argue whether the health consequences of these crowded, unsanitary sleeping conditions were understood at the time, or if people genuinely didn't make the connection between sharing beds with strangers and disease transmission, but lying here breathing the same air as two strangers while something crawls in the straw beneath you. You're thinking the germ theory of disease can't arrive fast enough. The chamber pot in the corner is making its presence known through smell, and you're very carefully breathing through your mouth. You're also doing mental calculations about whether your bladder can last until morning, or if you're going to have to navigate this dark room and use that pot, which seems like an adventure you'd prefer to avoid. Morning, you can last until morning. Probably. Outside, through the gaps in the shutter, you hear the watch calling the hour. 11 o'clock and all's well. His voice echoes down the street, fading into the rain. All's well is relative, you think, shifting again to avoid a particularly aggressive piece of straw. But you suppose you're not dead, not robbed, not frozen, and not sleeping in the rain. By 17th century standards, this counts as a successful evening. Sleep, it turns out, is not coming. You've been lying here for what feels like hours but is probably only 30 minutes, and your brain has decided that now, right now, when you're exhausted and desperately need rest, is the perfect time to be hyper-aware of absolutely everything. Every sound, every smell, every sensation is amplified to ridiculous levels. You're achieving a state of consciousness that's somehow both deeply tired and intensely alert, and it's profoundly unpleasant. The building talks. That's the first thing you notice when you stop trying to force sleep and just listen. The whole structure has a language of creaks and groans and pops that communicate its age and construction. A beam overhead makes a sharp crack that sounds exactly like someone stepping on a loose floorboard, and your heart rate spikes before you realise it's just wood contracting as the temperature drops. The joints where timbers meet flex minutely with wind pressure, producing low groans that sound almost organic, like the building is breathing. Which in a weird way it is, the whole structure expanding and contracting, with temperature and humidity, alive in its own wooden way. The thatch roof has its own vocabulary of sounds. Rain hitting it produces a steady hiss that would be white noise if it were consistent, but it's not. Gusts of wind create surges where the rain intensifies, then fades, then intensifies again. You can track weather systems passing overhead through audio alone. Something is living in that thatch. Multiple somethings, probably, and they're active now that the tavern's settled into nighttime quiet. Scratching, scurrying, what might be nest building or might be territorial disputes. The mice or rats or birds or whatever they are have their own society up there, conducting their business while you lie awake and listen. Water is dripping somewhere. Not inside the room, you hope not inside the room, but close enough to hear. A steady plip, plip, plip that's either from a leak in the roof guttering or rain collecting on something and dripping off. The rhythm is irregular enough to prevent you from tuning it out. Just when you think you've identified the pattern, it changes. Plip, 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 plip. Your brain keeps trying to find meaning in the pattern, which is exhausting and futile but apparently unstoppable. The carter beside you has transitioned from snoring to sleep-talking. Not words exactly. More like mumbled syllables and the occasional grunt that might be disagreement with a dream character, or might be indigestion. At one point he says something that sounds like Tuesday Market with surprising clarity, then subsides back into snores. The person in the other bed has stopped snoring temporarily. That alarming pause situation again, and you find yourself actually waiting for them to resume breathing. They do, with a snort that sounds like a small explosion. Your relief is disproportionate to the situation. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Sleep in pre-industrial societies often followed a biphasic pattern, with people sleeping for several hours, waking for an hour or two in the middle of the night, then sleeping again until dawn. This first sleep and second sleep pattern was considered normal, and the wakeful period was used for prayer, conversation, sex, or just lying quietly. Whether you're experiencing historical sleep patterns or just suffering from an uncomfortable bed and snoring roommates is unclear. Downstairs, the tavern is mostly silent, but not entirely. You hear occasional footsteps, the tavern keeper or his family checking something, or possibly a late customer using the privy out back. Voices murmur briefly, too distant to make out words, then fade. A door closes softly. More footsteps, this time overhead. Someone's in the attic space, or possibly on the roof checking for leaks. The footsteps pass directly above you, and small bits of dust or straw drift down from the ceiling timbers. You close your eyes instinctively, then open them again because sleep isn't happening anyway. The cold is becoming more insistent. The fire downstairs has been banked for the night, no longer sending warmth upward, and the building's heat is leaking away through the thatch, the walls, the gaps around the shutters. Your feet are cold despite being tucked under the blanket. Your nose is cold. That draft you noticed earlier has invited friends, and now you're in the path of multiple small air currents that find every exposed bit of skin with unerring accuracy. You shift position carefully, trying not to disturb the carter, trying to find a warmer spot or at least redistribute your body heat. The straw mattress crackles in protest. The rope supports groan. The carter mumbles something and rolls toward you, reclaiming territory. You're now occupying approximately 10 inches of mattress and questioning every decision that brought you to this moment. New sounds emerge from elsewhere in the building. Someone in another chamber is coughing, a wet, rattling cough that goes on long enough to be concerning. It finally subsides, and you hear them spit into what's presumably a chamber pot, then settle back down. In yet another room, a baby is crying. You didn't know there was a baby in this tavern, but there definitely is now, and it has opinions about being awake at this hour. The crying continues for several minutes while presumably exhausted parents try to soothe it. Eventually it quiets, and the building settles back into its baseline level of noise. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some period travellers supposedly stuffed their ears with wool or wax to block out the noise of shared sleeping quarters, though whether this was common practice or just wishful thinking recorded by particularly optimistic writers is unclear. You would absolutely try this technique if you had any wool or wax, but you don't. So you're stuck experiencing every single sound in full fidelity. The watch calls another hour. Midnight and all's well. His voice is fainter now. He's further away on his rounds, or the wind is carrying the sound differently. Midnight. You've been attempting sleep for maybe an hour and morning is still impossibly far away. The math is depressing. Even if you fall asleep right now, which seems unlikely given your current state of alertness, you're looking at maybe 5 hours before dawn, and that's if you're lucky. More likely 4 hours of fitful dozing interrupted by snoring, scurrying, and various bodily discomforts. Something larger than a mouse is moving below you. Through the gap in the floorboards, you can hear it clearly. Footsteps, but with a different rhythm than human. 4 legs instead of 2. The tavern dog probably doing nighttime rounds, checking for dropped food, or just restless. You hear it sniffing along the base of a wall, nails clicking on flagstone, then it settles, somewhere with a grunt and apparent satisfaction. At least someone's comfortable. Historians still argue whether people in this period genuinely slept better in these conditions than modern people would, or if they were simply so exhausted from physical labour that they could sleep anywhere. But lying here experiencing peak discomfort, you're thinking exhaustion probably played a major role. You're tired, but not tired enough. Not day labourer tired. Not hauled barrels and walked 20 miles tired. Just regular travelled in the rain and ate heavy food tired, which apparently isn't sufficient to overcome bad mattresses and snoring strangers. Your hip is going numb from the pressure of lying on your side on this inadequate padding. You roll onto your back and immediately the carter fills the space you vacated, pushing you closer to the edge. Fine, you'll lie on your back. Except now the straw is poking your shoulder blades, and you're staring at ceiling beams you can barely see in the darkness, and your mind is absolutely racing with observations about timber construction, when what you need is for it to shut down entirely. The building continues its nighttime conversation. The rain continues its irregular percussion. The sleepers continue their various symphonies, and you lie there, experiencing every moment of it, wondering if anyone in human history has actually gotten good sleep in a 17th century tavern, or if everyone just pretended the next morning to avoid seeming weak. At some point, you're not sure when, you must have actually fallen asleep, because you're being pulled out of something that resembles unconsciousness by the sound of roosters. Multiple roosters, apparently competing for who can be most aggressively loud at an ungodly hour. They're not even close by. These are neighbourhood roosters, possibly village roosters. They're crowing, carrying through the pre-dawn darkness, with the enthusiasm of creatures who genuinely believe they're summoning the sun through sheer vocal determination. The light, creeping through the gaps in the shutters, is grey and weak. That peculiar pre-dawn illumination that's not quite darkness, but definitely not day. It's the light that says, morning is approaching whether you're ready or not, and you are decidedly not ready. Your body feels like it's been compressed, folded and stored improperly. Every joint aches. Your neck has a crick that suggests you spent the night at an angle that necks were never meant to sustain. Your hip bone feels bruised from the straw and the wooden support beneath it. Sleep happened, technically, but whether it counts as rest is highly debatable. The carter is already awake and moving. You feel the bed shift as he sits up, hear him grunt with his own collection of aches and pains. He's pulling on his boots with the mechanical efficiency of someone who's done this morning routine in countless taverns across countless towns. No greeting, no acknowledgement of your shared night. He simply exists parallel to you, completes his preparations and leaves the chamber without a word. The door closes behind him, and you're alone with the still snoring occupant of the other bed, who has somehow slept through roosters, movement, and presumably their own discomfort. You force yourself upright, or attempt to. Your body lodges complaints at every stage of this process. Sitting requires effort. Standing requires determination. Your feet find the cold floor and immediately inform you that this was a mistake. They were warmish under the blanket and now they're freezing, but you're committed now. You fumble for your boots in the grey light, find them where you left them. Check that your valuables are still inside. They are. Small victories. The chamber looks even less appealing in dawnlight than it did last night. Everything that was merely suspicious in candlelight is clearly questionable now. The stains on the walls are more visible. The state of the floor, don't look too closely at the floor. The chamber pot definitely needs emptying, and you're grateful you managed to last the night without using it. That's an accomplishment worth celebrating, or at least acknowledging. You pull on your cloak, still damp, still smelling of wet wool, and make your way carefully toward the stairs. Your legs have forgotten how to function properly after a night in that position, and the stairs are steep enough to be genuinely dangerous when you're this uncoordinated. You grip the railing, take it slowly, and emerge into the main room of the tavern to find it in a state of transitional chaos. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Taverns typically began serving breakfast early, often around 5 or 6 in the morning, to catch travellers who wanted to get on the road at first light. The morning trade was important business, and tavern keepers who slept late risked losing customers to more industrious competitors. The tavern keeper's wife is already working, moving between the kitchen and the main room with that same tireless efficiency she displayed last night. The fire has been rebuilt, not to evening levels, but enough to provide warmth and cooking heat. Fresh bread is baking somewhere, that smell cutting through the stale ale and smoke remnants of last night. She glances at you, nods acknowledgement, and continues her work. No cheerful good morning, no inquiry about how you slept. This is business, and the business is feeding people and getting them moving. A few early risers are already scattered around the room. The merchant is at a table, looking somehow more anxious than he did last night, clutching his satchel and drinking something hot from a wooden cup. One of the locals, or possibly a different local, they all blur together, sits near the fire staring into the flames with the glazed expression of someone contemplating whether they drank too much or not enough. The carter who shared your bed is already gone, presumably checking his cart and horses, preparing to continue his journey. The serving girl appears with bread and what looks like weak ale. Breakfast ale, safer than water, traditional start to the day. She sets them down at various tables without fanfare. This isn't the elaborate breakfast service of the later centuries. This is fuel, bread, ale, maybe some cheese if you're lucky or willing to pay extra. Eat, pay, leave. The morning routine is transactional, stripped of the evening's social elements. You claim a seat near the fire because your body is still cold from the night, still protesting the whole sleeping in a 17th century tavern experience. The warmth feels incredible. You could probably fall asleep right here, right now, in this chair by the fire, and get better rest than you got upstairs. But that's not how this works. Morning has arrived, the tavern is moving into its new phase, and you're expected to participate in forward motion. The bread arrives in front of you, fresh, still warm, infinitely better than the heavy stuff from last night. You tear into it without ceremony, and it's actually good. Simple, but good. The morning ale is weak and slightly sour, but it's wet and it's traditional, and your body accepts it as the start of day ritual it is. You eat mechanically, fueling up for whatever the day holds, trying not to think about how little sleep you actually got. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some travellers supposedly swore by particular taverns for their sleeping accommodations, returning repeatedly despite discomfort, because at least it was familiar discomfort and they knew what to expect. Whether this loyalty was genuine or just the result of limited options, nobody's quite sure. Outside, through the gaps around the shutters, you can hear the village waking up. Dogs barking, voices calling greetings, cartwheels on cobblestones. The world is starting its day, indifferent to your exhaustion, and you're going to have to start your day too. The question of whether last night's sleep counts is irrelevant. Morning doesn't care. Morning is here, demanding participation. Historians still argue whether people in pre-industrial times genuinely felt more rested, despite uncomfortable sleeping conditions, or if they simply had no choice but to function anyway. But sitting here now, you're voting for no choice but to function. Rest is a luxury. Today is a requirement. You finish your bread, drain your ale, and contemplate the day ahead. The tavern keeper's wife moves past your table again, and this time you notice the softness in her movements despite the early hour, the way she's already planning for tonight's crowd while clearing away this morning's dishes. The fire crackles gently, settling into its daytime rhythm, less urgent than evening's roar, but steady, reliable, warm. Outside, the rain has stopped. You can tell because the drumming on the thatch has finally ceased, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the eaves, finding its way back to earth in its own time. The roosters have exhausted their morning pronouncements. The village sounds are gentler now, footsteps instead of shouts, quiet conversations instead of arguments, the soft rhythm of daily life beginning again. Your body is adjusting to being upright. The aches are still there, but they're settling into familiarity, the kind of discomfort you can carry with you as you move forward. The bread sits warm in your stomach. The fire has stopped feeling like an external heat source and started feeling like it's part of you, spreading through your chest, your limbs, reminding you that warmth exists and you can hold on to it. The light through the shutters is changing, growing stronger, losing that grey uncertainty and becoming genuine dawn. Gold touches the edges of the cracks, promising a day that might even be pleasant once the sun fully rises. The tavern is breathing more slowly now, the frenetic energy of last night completely gone, replaced by this quieter rhythm of beginning, of starting over, of another day in an endless chain of days. You stand slowly, gathering your things, feeling the weight of your cloak but also its protection. The tavern keeper nods as you pass, acknowledgement that you've completed the transaction, taken shelter, survived the night, and are now free to continue your journey. The door opens easily this morning, no resistance from swollen wood, and you step out into air that smells of rain, and earth and morning. Behind you, the tavern continues its eternal cycle. By tonight, the fire will roar again, the ale will flow, music and laughter and arguments will fill those low-ceilinged rooms. Other travellers will negotiate for beds, share those same lumpy mattresses, listen to those same settling timbers. The tavern doesn't change, only the people passing through do. And you carry forward into daylight, into whatever comes next, knowing you've experienced one night in the long history of nights that have happened and will happen in roadside taverns across England. It wasn't comfortable, it definitely wasn't quiet, but it was real, it was human, and in its own strange way, it was exactly what it needed to be. The morning wraps around you like a gentle hand, and you walk forward, leaving the tavern behind, carrying its memory forward like all travellers do. A story to tell, an experience to remember, a night that counts even if the sleep didn't. Sweet dreams await in the future. For now, there's only morning, and the road ahead, and the soft certainty that you've survived something generations before you survived, and generations after you will survive too. Rest now, if you can. The tavern will still be there, waiting, timeless and patient, for the next traveller who needs shelter from the rain.